Several months ago, my cat went missing in the woods, and I had to look for him. It was late at night, and the moon was a thin crescent, so the only source of light was my flashlight. I had seen my cat several times, but he seemed to be scared of something. Every time I got close, he would run further away. At a certain point, he got scared of something and ran back towards the house. I started to make my way back and saw a man. He was just standing there, absolutely still. He had nondescript brown hair and a tweed jacket. I could make out all of his facial features except his eyes. They just seemed to be shadow. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Then I said, "I can see you, you know," and was greeted with silence. I turned and walked a few steps, and he turned around. He was a few feet closer. I turned, walked some more, and looked again. This time he was partially hidden behind a tree. I did not need any more warning. I booked it back to my house where my cat desperately wanted to come in. I locked the doors and sat on my couch until I calmed down. Every night since, I hear a noise at my window, a loud, slow, rhythmic tap. There's no trees out there, and most of the nights it's happened there's no wind. Every time I've been too afraid to look, probably for the better. The last thing that I want to see is the man with the tweed jacket and no eyes. I'm a 39-year-old female, and my story took place when I was 15, but it feels like it was yesterday. It was the day that would change my innocent youth forever. I am from a little village in Ireland with a population of a few hundred. The nearest town is about 10 miles away. Growing up in rural Ireland was very idealistic. Summers were spent playing football with neighbours or going to the lake swimming till the sun went down. I was lucky enough that even though the population was small and the houses far apart, my best friend's house was only down the road. So during those summer months, Mary and I were inseparable. My friends and I grew up with lots of brothers and sisters in a safe village, and we were given a lot of freedom, and sometimes we were gone all day and only came back before dark. As it was the mid-90s, we had no mobiles, but our mums knew we would be okay and look out for each other. One thing we liked to do during these summers, besides going to the lake and hanging out at each other's houses, was to go downtown and look around the shops. The easiest way to go down was to get a hitchhike as there was no buses. Here in Ireland we call it thumbing. Hardly anyone hitches now because most households have 2 cars and parents are a lot more protective, but back in the 80s and 90s it was common. Our parents were okay with it, but there were certain rules we had to follow. I'm not entirely sure who came up with the rules, but I assume our parents did. Rule 1. Never hitch alone. You must thumb with at least 1 or 2 friends. Rule 2. Never take a lift if there are 2 or more men in the car, but 2 or more women is fine. Rule 3. Never take a lift from someone in a van. There could be more guys hiding in the back or worse, ropes and blindfolds. 4. This is the most important rule. When a car stops to pick you up, always ask the driver where they are going first. If you tell them where you are going first, they could pretend to be going to the same place to lure you in. We were innocent but had common sense, so we followed the rules down to a T. At least, we tried to. My friend Mary and I used to hitch once a week during the summer, so we could go to town with a population of a few thousand and look at the shops, eat ice cream and hang out. When we got a ride, we had to make small talk with the driver, and as 2 shy 15-year-olds, this bit sucked the most. To make it far worse, we took turns sitting in the front, and one did most of the talking. One day, we spent a few hours in town. It was pretty uneventful, so we decided to thumb back. At around 3 p.m, we usually went to the spot where we'd hitch from, just on the outskirts of the town. We were only waiting about 5 minutes when a white car pulled up. Before we could ask where he was going, he asked us first. My friend told him, and he said he was just passing through our village on the way to another. Rule 4. Broken. But he seemed nice enough, and we just wanted to go home. It was my turn to sit in the front. The driver introduced himself as John, a farmer, and was super friendly. He was dressed in a worn t-shirt with holes in it, had tattered pants, and smelled of cow poo. The cow was full of bits of straw, an old and battered like the driver. He was about 60, had no wedding ring on, and don't ask me why, but I noticed these things. About halfway between town and our home village, he asked if we heard a noise. No, we reply. There it is again. Sounds like a banging noise. He said that, but we didn't really hear anything and just sat there quietly. Might be the exhaust. I'll have to pull in and have a look. He pulled up on a busy road and went to take a look. I didn't hear anything, said Mary. He seems like a weirdo, I replied. Call it intuition, but even though he was super friendly and chatty, I got a bad feeling from him. Next thing he does is come back to the driver's side and tells us that his exhaust is hanging down and was hitting off the road, and he needs help to tie it up. It was then I noticed he had string holding up his pants instead of a belt, and thought this was odd. He got some string off the boot, same colour string as his belt, and we both went to get out the car. Although I got a bad vibe from him, I didn't feel scared at this stage. We were on a busy road and it was around 3:30, so we both got out of the car. He showed us the exhaust pipe hanging down and used a rag to hold it up because it was hot. My friend Mary took over holding it while he secured it with string. They were both kneeling while I just stood there and watched. It was then I noticed his flies were open, and I could see his genitals. He was clearly not wearing any underwear. He didn't even have a belt on, so I figured I wasn't surprised. In my head I thought, what the hell is going on? Oh crap, but said nothing. I stood there in shock. Mary hadn't noticed at this stage and just continued to hold the pipe. When John was standing up, he noticed his fly was open and acted shocked. Oh girls, I'm so sorry. I only have a safety pin holding the fly together. Must have come off. Forgive me, and get back in the car. Mary was stunned because she got a close-up of his privates, which left me to do the talking. I told him it was okay, that it was an accident. So we go back to the car. He fastened the safety pin even though I didn't see him look for it. All was hidden again. Back in the car, the atmosphere was now very different. We both felt mortified, and he kept apologizing over and over. I looked out our passenger window and repeated, "It's okay." Then he said something that turned my stomach. "Well, girls, you're taking it very well. If I didn't know any better, I'd swear you'd liked it." Then he nudged me in the arm with his arm. Like you would a friend. I looked at him through the corner of my eye, still facing the window, when I noticed his fly was undone again, and he was exposed again. He must have noticed me looking because he said, "Oh, sorry, safety pin keeps opening. Just don't look." Fine by me, I thought. "Okay," I reply, and continued to look out the window. He kept nudging me and saying, don't be looking, and giggling at the same time, like it was a playful joke. Mary began giggling too, because she laughs when she's nervous. I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was getting angry at this stage. He wouldn't stop telling me to stop looking, and then he said, "Your friend is laughing, she must be enjoying the view." This made her laugh even harder. Now remember that we're both polite 15-year-olds and always respect our elders and are a little shy, so I would never speak up to an adult. The nudging in my arm and my friend's laughter was all getting too much. He asked, "Is this the first Willie you've ever seen?" I was turned facing the passenger window so much that I had my back to him. There's no way I could be looking. I lost my temper and shouted at the top of my voice that I'm not looking, and to Mary to shut up. Silence followed. He said sorry, that he was only joking and I didn't need to be so serious. I said nothing and sat there red with temper. I should have told him to let us out. I should have told him to cover himself up, the dirty old perv, but I was in shock too, and part of me wanted to believe that it was an innocent mistake. We all know it wasn't. We finally arrived to our tiny little village. We got out and he said again he was sorry about the whole thing, and my friend got her voice back and assured him it was okay. I said it was okay and not to worry. I said thanks for the lift, and what he said sickened me. He looked me up and down and with a creepy smile said, "Girlies, thanks for everything," and drove off. We were left speechless. We sat down on a nearby bench to process all of this before going home. We made a deal not to tell our parents or they'd never let us hitchhike again. My friend got back her voice and repeated, "Pervert, sicko, smelly bastard." He had planned it the whole time, over and over. About 5 minutes after sitting down on a bench, who drives going in the direction we just came from? Only pervert Farmer John, waving and smiling, while we sat there stunned. He had beeped to catch our attention. So much for just passing through our village. A few months later, and the ordeal went to the back of my mind. Occasionally we would talk about Farmer John, but we made jokes about it, and we told our friends what happened. One day I told a friend of mine named Brid. A cousin of hers had told her a very similar story. The cousin lived on another village about 20 miles in the other direction of town. She was a few years older than us, and while hitchhiking home one day, the same thing happened to her and her friend. The exhaust, the safety pin, and the undone fly. It was no accident, and my worst fears were confirmed. Farmer John was really pervert John. So to the man who smells like cow crap, has worn clothes and used string to hold up his pants, and to the man who gets off exposing himself on young girls, let's not meet again. I lived in Astoria, Ravenswood houses in the 90s. I was friends with the mailman who was a really cool guy. His name was Rich. What happened after New Year's was crazy, and for a month I saw this man deteriorate into a killer. Rich was an all-round cool guy. He was good-looking, charismatic, and delivered the mail around our neighborhood. His baby's mom lived in my projects in Ravenswood house, and he would say hi to everyone on Christmas no matter how poor people were, and they often left him a tip in cash. Everyone liked him. But Rich had a dark side that involved a fight where he beat his baby mama and got a restraining order. He broke her orbital bone during an argument. During that year, his girlfriend would often walk about with 2 black eyes or a swollen cheek. He was beating her. He did not show up for 2 weeks because of some departmental procedure suspending him till they found out what the case was, and I saw him 2 weeks later. He was much less cheery. The new year brought him a child support garnishment for his kid and legal problems, not to mention problems regarding custody. A few months passed, and I saw he had started staring into the distance in the hot sun, and did not look good. His long stares would be longer and longer, and it would take time for him to reply to his name being called. Everyone around the way heard he had broken a court order and beat his girlfriend again. He was no longer the cheery, charismatic man we knew, but something darker. He stopped saying hello to people. One day coming out from work, I see a Telemundo truck along with Eyewitness News Channel 7 and NY1 news vans. Rich killed his wife and 7-year-old and 13-year-old stepsons. Both heads were removed. The kids' genitals were found in their mouths, both of their heads in a closet. They lived 2 buildings down from me, and my friend was their neighbor. Cops sealed off the building. He tried to cut his wrists but failed, and was taken by ambulance. After detectives left the crime scene 2 weeks later, and everything was concluded, we snuck in through my neighbor who lived next door. All the action took place in the kitchen. It was like blood was dragged from the living room to the bedroom. The bedroom had a broken door, but we didn't go inside. This was before crime scenes came to clean up. I had nightmares for weeks. For a week, the boy who lived in my building, who was 7 and friend with the kids, became traumatized after he heard about his friend's death. His mother encouraged me to talk to him, since he looked up to me as a big brother, and I remember he asked me, "Why do people hurt children?" I could only say, "Because they're sick in their heads," and he cried in front of me as I comforted him. From that point on, I had trouble sleeping for a while. Going in the actual murder scene made things worse. I will always remember a blank stare when I joked around with him. It was like he was staring right through me. He is currently serving 3 life sentences.
Back in 2015, when I was 12, I went on my Year 6 reward camp. It was a place called Woodman's Point. The place is isolated in the midst of suburbia, and its surrounding bushland made it feel remote. In 1886, it was a quarantine station isolating immigrants with smallpox, the bubonic plague, and even the Spanish flu, which means that at least a few people have died there. The facility continued being used as such until '79 when it was closed. Fast forward to modern day, there is now a recreational camp that hosts many school and outdoor activities including rock climbing with an area called the Cube, with a flying fox on it. The camp had dormitories that we were split up into genders, and luckily I was placed with my friends. The camp itself was fun, and we played games with the counselors and in the bush surrounding it, built rafts on the beach and tried out the Cube in all of its glory. One night before dinner, our teachers organized a group activity where each dormitory had to find glow sticks, with the dormitory who finds the most glow sticks winning. This is where the scary begins. The group was made up of 7 or 8 students, and we were arranged with 2 looking in the front, 2 looking behind us, and the rest of us looking to the sides. That was where I was arranged. Sounds like a smart game plan, but you'd be wrong, as our group found not a single glow stick. We were walking down a path with 2 buildings on either side when the front 2 saw what they describe as a pale, skinny, naked old guy running between the buildings. No one else saw it, and we began talking and teasing the hell out of who saw it. When we were about to round the corner, the thing peeped around and looked at us. The exchange only lasted seconds, but in that time I noticed how frail it was, how it was really pale with a small mouth. I don't remember seeing eyes, just sockets. That's what I saw. Every one of us saw the same thing, and we quickly turned and ran for our teachers in fear, crying. Of course, the teachers didn't believe us, said it just being the torchlight. There was another school doing their camp, and they could have been doing activities too, but we didn't hear or see anyone. Sometimes I come across my old friends, and we still talk about it, and it was still the scariest thing we've ever seen. I'm a 24-year-old female and live in a very populated city where people drive a lot. I'm still shaken by this, and I'm honestly curious to hear your thoughts. So the other night I parked my car outside, went to let my dog in my house, and went back outside to grab my stuff. It was around 6 p.m. and dark because of the winter. I get into the driver's seat, lock the car, and I'm sitting there for about a minute getting my stuff together, when all of a sudden I see a man walk from in front of my car to the driver's side window. He was holding something up to the window, and I automatically get extremely panicked. A few months ago, a man held a wrench up to my window in a grocery store parking lot where I was sitting with my roommate and I. But he saw the dog and walked away fast. It was a sketchy situation then, and a sketchy one now. The next few steps are blurry. I'm looking at him in a panic. He is motioning for me to roll down my window, and I look into the back of my car to see my dog's there to protect me, and realize she is not there, as I had just let her into the house. I do realize that I had the back windows both 75% open, and then a thought pops into my mind. I can drive away. My car is on. I shift the car into drive, and he reaches back onto either the window, the door, or the side of the car, and I begin to drive and he backs up. I pull into the street and almost hit another car, and end up pulling out and leave shaking. The next day I realized my landlord had a camera pointed at the front of the house to see if packages got stolen. I asked if he had clips from the night before, and he did. Too bad it was motion censored, so it only showed the moments when my car was pulling out. He walks away from the car, and he has a huge wooden plank or something in his hand, hidden behind his back, at least 3 foot. He then walked down one way of the street a little bit, turned around and went a different way. I wish I didn't even see the video now, because I was scared before, and even more so after. Now I know he was holding something there that could have potentially been a weapon. I'm very thankful I trusted my instincts. Someone on a neighborhood website that night said their car got stolen 2 streets over, so maybe he wanted my car, but I'm glad I didn't get to find out. This happened to my parents. My mum going off the deep end on Crazy Train isn't that out of character, but my dad doesn't do that ever, and he swears by this story.
When I was around 2, my mum woke up from a nightmare, and she woke up my dad. He tried going back to sleep, but she told him not to, because his mother was about to call him, because a friend of theirs had been decapitated in some kind of accident. My dad, of course, thought this was nonsense, but my mum was in hysterics over it and couldn't sleep. Sure enough, a few minutes later the phone rang. It was his mum, letting him know that his friend and the friend's little brother's girlfriend had both died in a car crash coming home from a party about 3 miles away from us. My dad's mum and their family were very close, and my grandma, my dad's mum, and the mother from that family were lifelong friends, and she had just died 6 months or so. Anyway, we later learned that my dad's friend had been decapitated when he lost control in his ragtop Camaro, hit a tree, flipped the car upside down, and slid a ways on down the road. Neither he nor his younger brother's girlfriend were wearing seatbelts. This would have been back in 1981. In 2011, me and my family were at Darien Lake in upstate New York on a roller coaster called the Ride of Steel, like as in Superman. On the tracks there runs 2 trains, with 8 or so per train. They sit 2 people across and had lap restraints. I was on train 2, which was at the station. While getting in, I looked out at the coaster and thought I saw a falling blob just after the second major drop. I shook it off as I was wearing glasses and my vision is still trash. So we go around the track and stop just before the station. We are waiting and waiting, and my family wonder what's happening. We see the car in front of us is still occupied with the riders, with an empty wheelchair next to one of the cars. Now it was a packed ride with long wait times and every seat was full except one, in the car next to the wheelchair. After waiting about 15 minutes, they finally let everyone off but keep the train in the station. After 15 more minutes, they send the train and we pull into the station. The ride attendants are in shock and don't speak to anyone. Later, we spoke to some of the waiting guests who were in the line to ride the Ride of Steel. They said a man fell out. I witnessed the death of a guy on a roller coaster and didn't even realize it. The guy who died was an Iraq double veteran amputee who was missing one leg and most of the other. He flew out of the lap bar because he had no legs, and to this day people do not believe me when I tell the story, and my family barely believes me, as I was 12 at the time. I was never really afraid of gore or death, but in that moment there sits a feeling, knowing you witness someone's last moments alive, and that feeling is indescribable. This happened a number of years ago in early December. I was playing a mobile game for about 3 months prior. It's a fantastical medieval war-type game where you level up your castle to get stronger troops and better defenses, and as you upgrade your buildings, it also features invading other castles after you played for more than 7 days. There are alliances formed where other players team up and work together on events. You can also edit your profile and change your picture. Global chat, alliance chat, and private chat, and it's easily accessible to anyone. I got into it several months later than others. I discovered the game from an ad, and it was based off one of my favorite series. And since I've played similar games, I adjusted quickly and was recruited by one of the top alliances, which also is kind of infamous for its members being a bit too friendly with female gamers. I did use my own picture in the profile, but my hair was covering half my face, and I had an anti-dust mask on. Only my left eye was clear, and yet they still invited me. I'm not gonna lie, I had thought I might run into some pesky guys, but I still accepted anyway. It was just my 3rd day playing, and I needed all the resources I could get to strengthen my castle, and getting into alliances is a surefire way to get donations early in game. Besides, every alliance is bound to have their rotten crops. Most of them were pretty okay. The leader was really helpful, and while he would tease the girls sometimes in chat, he would stop when we tell them to, or he would sense we were getting uncomfortable. There was a handful that were straight up thirsty jerks. One guy said that girls were inferior to him, and another offered in-game currency to any girl that wanted to cyber with him. And what particularly ticked me off was this dude was claiming I was his property, even going so far as to spam the global chat to warn other players to not flirt with me or he'll destroy them. Sheer idiocy. He's a wallet warrior, meaning a person who buys in-app purchases. That also means free players like me can't exactly fight back with him and expect to leave a dent on his castle. The leader sent me a private message and apologized on his behalf and told me he can't exactly kick the jerk out of the alliance since he was a valuable player despite his insufferable behavior. The most I could do was block him and hope he stays in the alliance so he wouldn't attack me. He didn't, but instead he made dummy accounts and constantly sent me private chats. I was getting pissed with repeatedly blocking his accounts that I finally conceded to his condition for him to stop spamming me. That is, for me to unblock his main account. For several days he didn't talk to me that much, and when he did, he was actually polite. The leader told me he must have turned over a new leaf, but I wasn't convinced. But I didn't shut him out. That was when it got really bad. Thinking back, I may have been a bit careless when I was talking to the other players. There were female players, and I quickly bonded with them and made friends. Sometimes we'd chat in the alliance, just so that it would be lively in there. The conversations were random, but there were snippets where we wrote our information. Not the specifics, but I clearly remember saying my birth country and school I attended to. But the city, the street, the exact address, I didn't spill. So it was the first week in December, when a Christmas event was held in-game. By that time I was not bothered by the jerk, and we could even hold civil, albeit short conversations. I was talking with a female player when he typed in the Alliance chat. "Do you like flowers?" It was a random question, but I decided to answer, "I guess." A few seconds later his message popped up. "Do you like surprises?" Again, I wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but I didn't want to appear rude. Pleasant ones, yes. My friend had to go offline, and she said goodbye and sent me a virtual hug, since we can't hug for real. It's just sort of became a greeting for the girls in the Alliance chat. I almost forgot about the jerk, but then he wrote, "You'll be moved to tears soon. See you. I'll give you more than virtual hugs." I was positively weirded out by his words, so I made an excuse to log out the game. It was nearing school break, and classes were pretty chill, so I was just hanging out in the library to have some peace and quiet. But then one of the working students, i.e. a close friend, tapped me on the shoulder with a quizzical look on his face. "Hey, did you snag a boyfriend without telling me?" "What? Why'd you say that?" I asked, not seeing the connection at this time. "There was a bouquet of flowers sent to you. It's in the department office right now." That's when it all clicked. All the random questions. That creepy endliner. He found me. I was panicking so bad to the point I had to go to the clinic and skip the rest of classes. I didn't accept the flowers, I didn't even want to see them. When I was asked what to do with the bouquet, I told them to throw them out. My username didn't even have any relation to my real name, and when I was asked for my name, I only gave them my nickname. It creeped me out how this jerk managed to find me. I was scared out of my wits and chatted to the leader about it, and he was shocked too. He then sent me screenshots of their conversation, of me, to which the jerk was doing most of the talking. The leader was sending clipped, dismissive responses, but the jerk didn't seem to notice. He was too immersed in his fantasies, horrible thoughts that made my skin crawl to this day. I told him I'm quitting the game and to apologize to the Alliance on my behalf. I don't want to worry the other players, so I had to make the leader tell a lie, and that I was getting too busy with studies and that I had to stop playing. I don't exactly know how he tracked me down, but I spent the rest of my semester fearing for my life. I didn't go anywhere alone. Heck, I rarely hang out with my friends. Fortunately, they understood after I explained the situation, and I graduated with paranoia clinging on my back. But even now, I couldn't get myself to play any game similar to the one where I unluckily met him. I was also extra wary to guys, especially strangers. After that flower incident, I didn't get any more surprises for him, and I hope it stays that way. And as for the jerk, let's never meet again.
I have lived in a town on the East Coast my whole life. It was a small town and so everyone knew each other. My school holds around 400 students, so it's pretty small. We don't regularly get new students, but this day in sophomore year we got 2, both girls, and they were both sophomores, same as I at the time. I became friends with one of them called Casey. About a year goes by and we're juniors now in our first semester. It was announced there was a car wash in the neighborhood next to the city I lived in. The other transfer student I was not friends with was the victim. It was announced there was a car crash in the neighborhood next to the city I lived in, and the other transfer student that I hadn't been friends with was the victim. It was announced later that day that she died from her injuries. I wasn't very good friends with her, so it didn't affect me too much. At least, not more than a low mood and condolences. What surprised me was that no one else was upset. Not a single one of her friends, no teachers nor parents. This is where the unexplainable part comes in. I went to my guidance counselor to talk about what happened because the fact that seemingly no one cared bothered me. I asked him how he felt about the incident, and he said he hadn't seen or heard the news, but was sorry I lost a friend. I told him we weren't close, but asked if he could look up her name for me, and he told me the girl I was asking for didn't exist in the school records, but found a student who shared her last name. The student? Casey. But Casey had walked into class the very next day like it was nothing. I still never understood what happened to the other transfer student because there was no record of her whenever I searched. It's still the weirdest thing to happen to me. I went to boarding school where we weren't allowed to smoke. To make up for this, I would go out at night when it was dark and smoke there. One night, I stood behind the barracks and smoked in the distance, when I see a girl figure in a long white dress and thought, who the hell is that? I mean, we couldn't exactly call for the figure because I and the rest of the lads were hiding. If the teacher came by, we would get expelled, or at the very least be sent home for a while, which obviously isn't in anyone's best interest. But it disappeared when it got further into the woods. Me and the lads were confused. I didn't think much of it as someone else probably going for a smoke, but to this day I still think about it, because it was like taken out of a movie. Weird as hell. And I still wonder, who would go out in the dark with a long white dress in the woods at night? Now I don't believe in ghosts, but if I get paranoid enough, then I do. And it's one of those times that I believe it was something not human. It still creeps me out when I think about it too much. It makes no sense to me. She just walked into the woods. And I know that isn't the best way to describe it, but if you'd have seen it, you'd be left just as perplexed as I am. For my story, we need to go into a bit of very localized Scottish folklore. I went to a boarding school called Gordonstown in Scotland. The school is built in what used to be the residence of the Gordon family, who were lesser Scottish nobles. Most famously, there was a man called Sir Robert Gordon, a 3rd Baronet, who was referred to as the Wizard of Gordonston. He had an interest in alchemy and the occult, and built a round building known as Round Square, which, in local folklore from Elgin and Duffus, is believed to be the location of where he conducted his magical experiments. They say he sold his soul to a devil and built a round building so that the devil couldn't hide around the corners. One night a devil did come and attempted to claim his soul, and he trapped it in a stone in the center of the square. Eventually, at some point later, a devil came one Hallow's Eve and took his soul, and the wizard was no more. Anyway, when I was in the boarding school, my house was Round Square. We lived in the literal round house where Robert Gordon supposedly trapped a devil in the stone in the middle of it. Well, one Halloween night, me and my floor mates went to this school dance, and on our way back we were talking about the legend of the wizard. So, legend had it that if you took a rock that sat atop of the stone in the center of the square and knocked it 3 times, the devil tapped and would come out. So we tried to see who was brave enough to do it, Not because we thought a devil would come out, but because you walked in the grass in the center of the square and the seniors would beat the crap out of you. Anyway, I was the dumbass who decided to knock on the stone and nothing happened. So I ran back before the seniors could see me, and we all hung out and chatted, had some sweets and went to bed. At around 3 a.m. I woke up and was completely paralyzed. I could only move my eyes and saw the floor of my room. And then that's when I saw something. Crawling up to me, moving ever so slowly towards me, slowly making its way to my bed, climbing on the stairs at the foot and crawling on top of me. I could feel its weight on my legs, then my chest, and blowing all the air out my lungs, creeping all the way to my face where I could smell its breath and see that it was a mouth without a face. I could see its teeth, and I wanted to yell, but I couldn't even breathe. It was suffocating. Then suddenly I felt a rush of air sweep my lungs. I yelled to wake up my roommate, and as soon as I could, let out a sound. The thing was gone. I've never had an episode of sleep paralysis before or since, and I don't know if this was just a very creepy coincidence or something that I pissed off. There was a psycho in our elementary school. It was in grade 5. He lasted 5 months. My friend Matt and I recalled somehow ending up in a room with him and about 5 other kids during a normal class. This classroom was primarily used for storage. We're all talking and the conversation eventually leads to teachers we dislike. One in particular was disliked by all of us, and her name was Mrs. Paul. Eventually, Matt starts talking about how he would like to blow up her car, so he starts gathering stuff from around the room to achieve this. He grabs something that looks like the old keyboard part of a computer, one of the original ones, and gets some other kids to look for things he can attach it to, and is explaining how part A works with part B in order to make an explosive. Looking back, it's scary how he truly believed he could have built such a working explosive to take out the person he liked. Well, unsurprisingly to all, 2 weeks later, it was found out that he was expelled because they found him underneath Mrs. Paul's car trying to attach something underneath it. One evening, as I'm on my computer browsing Facebook, I happen to get a message notification. Thinking it's one of my friends or family members, as I have my profile blocked from people I don't know, I click the notification to open up the message. It's from an elderly man who doesn't live in the same town as me. He tells me I'm very beautiful, and I reply with a thanks and leave it at that. I should never have replied, because he immediately replies with, "Are you single?" when clearly in my profile picture there is my boyfriend of 3 years and I embracing. I tell him no, and he goes, "Shame." I end up blocking him and go to bed. The next morning, I'm opening and I'm alone. It's dark out, only 5 a.m, and I don't open for another hour. When I hear a, "Hello, you look beautiful as ever this morning," I turn around expecting one of my co-workers from the grocery store that my kiosk is placed in, and is just messing with me. But to my horror, the elderly man was there. He lives in a town that's about an hour and a half away from me, and the fact that he drove all the way down here just to see me terrified me. I told my manager about it. He asked me to go to the back room and would inform me when the guy was gone. It took a while, but my manager finally came for me. The guy, after I disappeared, ended up walking the whole store multiple times trying to find me, even asking associates if they'd seen me from Starbucks around there and he needed to talk to me. My manager quickly told the gentleman he was worrying his employees and that it would be best if he left before he had to call the police. Needless to say, he hasn't spoken to me, but I do occasionally see him lurking around the store. I knew my uncle was going to die before he did. Basically, I had a dream, and in that dream it was the first Christmas without my uncle. All this was about 2 months before he told us he had cancer, mind you. I thought it was just an awful dream. Then, of course, later down the line,
He told us he had cancer. My dream instantly came to the forefront of my mind, but I didn't tell anyone. The first Christmas without him, 2 years later, played pretty much the same as that dream I'd had. A strange, ominous feeling of déjà vu crept over me that day, but I never told anyone, for fear it would make me seem like I was making his death about me, if that makes sense. I just thought it was strange and creepy, and I've never had an opportunity to discuss it with anyone. What do you think? As a 14-year-old boy, I have experienced some scary things, but this has to be the scariest. This happened to me during the summer of 2019. On this day, I was headed to my cousin's house for a party. He told me that he also invited a family friend who he and I were close to, so I was fine with it. It was around 4 p.m. when I left my house. Herbert lives around 40 minutes away from me, so it was a decently long drive. It's good to know that Herbert lives at the end of a cul-de-sac, which is at the end of a street. On his right and left were neighbors, but in front of his house there was only a forest. I arrived at Herbert's house around 5. I said hello to his family and the other people there. I then greeted Herbert and Abel. We decided to go swimming. Herbert has a big swimming pool in his backyard. We swam for about 3 hours, and after we were just chilling in his room playing video games and talking. Our parents told us they were going out and asked if we wanted to go with them. We all said no, so they left, meaning the only people that were home were me, Herbert, and Abel. About an hour later, I got the bright idea of ding-dong ditching. For those of you unfamiliar, it's when you go up to someone's house, press their doorbell, and flee, preferably hiding in some bushes or something, to witness the hilarity of them opening the door to be met with no one. Since this story took place during the summer at 9 p.m, it wasn't all that dark out. We skipped a bunch of streets, then started ding-dong ditching houses. Each one gave a funny reaction. The next house we would go to, we all agreed would be our final one. A weird thing that we would do is play rock, paper, scissors to decide who would be doing the actual ding-dong ditch to the house. He did the last house, so it was between Abel and I. I ended up losing, so I went to ring the doorbell of the house. I rang the doorbell and ran and hid behind the car that was parked across the street. Abel and Herbert were hiding in the bushes near the car. I would have been hiding behind the bushes as well, but the bushes were further from the house, so I thought it would risk me being seen. I waited a good 2 minutes for the door to open. A tall man emerged. The man was white, about 6'5" with a beard. What happened next surprised me. As soon as the man opened the door, he ran in my direction, yelling, "Come here, I won't hurt you." I did what anyone would do. I took off running. The man kept repeating the phrase to me. That only caused me to run faster, and I ran so fast and far that I don't even know where the man stopped running, but eventually he did. I had my phone on me, so I took a rest from running so much when I received a call from Herbert. Here's how the conversation went. "Yo, dude, you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. This is crazy. The guy literally chased me. Meet me back at your house." I ran back to Herbert's house and entered his backyard through the side gate. Then I entered his house through the back door, locking it behind me. The adults weren't home yet. That never happened to me before while doing ding-dong ditching, so I was freaked out a bit, but I calmed down and told Abel and Herbert what the man was saying to me while he chased me. Abel tried to help us forget about it by saying, "Let's go watch a movie in Herbert's room." While we were walking up the stairs, we heard Herbert's backyard side gate door open and close. Abel asked the parents. I called my mum and they said they were still nowhere near the house yet. My heart sank. I told Abel and Herbert that my parents were starting to freak out as well. I went downstairs and screamed. Herbert and Abel both came and asked what happened, and I told them to look at the backyard door. There was a man wearing black, all black, staring at us through the backyard door. I could make it out to be the same man who had been chasing me, and in his hand I could see what appeared to be a baseball bat. The man tried the doorknob, twisting it until the lock kept on restricting it. He started laughing like a mentally insane person, then said to come out and play and that he wouldn't hurt me. We were all frozen in fear. I have never been so afraid in all my life. I said to the man that I was calling the police. It was a bluff, but it worked. The man vanished from the backyard door, and we hear the backyard side gate open and close. We quickly ran upstairs to see the man waving at us and running into the forest, never to be seen again. We promised each other never to tell anyone, and we didn't. And Abel and I stayed the night at Herbert's house because we were planning to go anyway. I still get scared to this day thinking about what happened. The man chased me for God knows how long and then showed up at Herbert's back door. There was nothing stopping the man from breaking the glass door and coming into the house. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he did, or if I just forgot to lock the door. This happened about 2 years ago, and is now a distant memory that I decide not to think about. I'm still chill with Abel and Herbert, but we obviously have not been ding-dong ditching since. A few years back, my friend and I were walking around the mall. We had to use the restroom, and the nearest one was this creepy isolated one towards the back. My friend would always tell me that the bathroom gave her bad vibes, but I thought she was just being paranoid. As we were heading towards the bathroom, a man passed us, giving us the creepiest stare. I turned around and noticed he was following us, so I quickened my pace and urged my friend to do the same. She was confused but obeyed, and I scanned my surroundings to see if there was a place we could hide or find a public place, but to my dismay there was only an empty backlot with a dumpster for him to potentially dispose of our bodies. I panicked and ran to the bathroom. Once inside, my friend asked me what was going on, and I explained and told her to put her weight against the door since there was no lock. A few seconds later, someone was trying to open it. I freaked out and pushed against the door so whoever it was couldn't get in. The person wouldn't budge and pushed harder. At one point the door opened a crack and I was able to see the man pushing against the door. I freaked out and called my dad while simultaneously keeping my weight against the door. What's funny about all this is my friend not freaking out and giggled at some points. She even suggested to go hide under stools, and I was so shaken up with fear and adrenaline that I called her a dumbass. Even funnier is when I told my dad, "Hello Dad, someone's tried to kidnap, come quickly." He was like, "For real? Are you sure? Alright, you got the door?" Damn, well, alright, I'm coming. Long story short, he stopped pushing and we waited a few minutes until my dad was there. We heard a hard knock on the door and for some reason it felt like it was safe to finally open it. It was a few girls standing there confused. They asked if we were okay since I was crying, and I told them, and they got concerned and described the man I saw, and I asked if it was him. They only confirmed it to me. Truly scary, and I'm glad we made it out of there. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in bad energy and stuff. But I do believe in shadow people. Why? I've seen them. So, one of the first times I can remember seeing a shadow person was in 5th grade. I went to a pretty exclusive private school and we took a lot of field trips. Well, one trip I'll never forget. We went to the dunes of Michigan in the middle of winter. I don't know whose bright idea this was, but it was like a deserted summer camp. One of the counselors did teach us about crushing wintergreens, lifesavers, in the dark, and you could see sparks, so that was pretty cool. He did it in the woods, so it was pretty neat to see as a 5th grader. The camp was covered with snow, and as I said, was probably rocking during the summer, but at winter, eating in a dining hall, made for 6 times as many children and a skeleton crew of staff was a little haunting. The place was kind of old too. The building was definitely mid-20th century and creaked and groaned. One counselor wasn't one of our teachers, it was a real counselor from the camp, and one night we had to sleep in a cabin that segregated the boys and girls. The counselor was actually a cool guy and probably smoked grass and never had a desk job in his life, so we liked him. But he assigned us bunks. I was against the wall on the back side of the cabin top bunk. There were 2 rows of bunk beds, probably 6 to a side. I was pretty stoked about having a top bunk and having the wall next to me.
although the counsellor was by the door in the front of the cabin, of course. This was the 80s, and no second door fire escape. He slept on the left side of the bottom bunk, which made sense being by the door and at ground level. Now this place was really far from north in Michigan, at the top of the index finger of the mitten shape of the state, but not the UP, and it was really quiet and dark. When the counsellor turned off the cabin lights, there was nearly no light. The only light was from the outbuilding about 50 yards away, a typical sodium outdoor bulb. So us boys settled down and felt a bit restless, and couldn't really sleep that great, and I wasn't even sure if I fell asleep, but I looked towards the door and there it was, a shadow person. The shadow person was probably 7 feet tall, because when he started walking he had to bend down every time. He looked down to a boy. It was like he was checking on them, and then moved to the next bunk. I obviously couldn't believe what I was seeing and was totally petrified. The shadow person was moving at a leisurely rate, not fast, not slow, and only paying attention to the boy who he was checking out. As he or it got closer, I had a better look at him. He wasn't really detailed. He was static or fuzzy on the edges. Ridiculous as it may sound, he kind of looked like a stick figure, but all black as night. I could only make him out because of the light through the first 2 windows of the cabin, with the residual light from the outbuilding. As he creeped closer and closer to my bed, I was paralyzed with fear. I felt like I couldn't even say anything or move if I wanted to. A little odd too it was as though someone turned down the volume, because before you could hear the kids tossing and turning, but now it was silent. As I stated, I was on the last bed to the right side of the top bunk. The shadow man made it to the top bunk next to mine, but it seemed like an eternity as his movements were just so slow. Up until this point, everything was on the rails, checking one bed to the next, so maybe I could have explained it away, but as he checked the top of the second to the last bunk next to mine, he abruptly looked away. The way he was moving, he should have gone to the left side, second to last, to be uniform, but instead, his body/head tilted towards me. He kind of cocked his head like a dog when they're confused. He then inched closer and closer at a much slower pace, like he was sneaking on me. I assure you, my eyes were wide open. I was clinging to my itchy baby blue woolen blanket and sheet, and had them yanked up past my nose, up to my eyes, where the top of the head was. Then the shadowy man's face got closer to mine, and there was honestly nothing to make out. It was just an empty void of space, shaped like a person, but as his head approached me, I couldn't see his body any longer. At this point, I felt like 10 degrees colder. My heart was racing. I couldn't make sense of anything. I didn't know why anyone else was experiencing this. I felt like I was between the cracks and seeing something I shouldn't. The blackness of his head totally engulfed me in what seemed like an instant, and then suddenly it was morning and light outside and everyone was waking up. When I referred to this story a few times since, I called him the Sandman, because it was like an entity was making sure we were asleep, but he caught me awake and knocked me out. When I was 18, I went with my sister to the rallies by our house. I always looked young, so I probably looked like I was 14. This random guy pulled up while we were outside eating and asked us where the library was. So I told him to just keep driving straight on the road he was originally on. That's when he asked me another question, where I worked. I actually told him where, but that I was actually about to quit. Immediately, he asked me if I wanted to work for him, but that we'd be traveling a lot, and he couldn't afford 2 hotel rooms, so we'd have to share. I politely declined, and that was the end of that. A year later, I'm walking down the same street, and the same guy pulls over and asks me if I know where the library is. I tell him to keep driving straight. He then asks me if I worked for him before, and I tell him no, and he drives off. I move away for about 3 years, and then when I get back, get an apartment about 3 blocks from my old house right next to the rallies. I'm walking to work on the same road, and the same guy pulls over, and we have the same conversation.
A year later, I'm walking again and he pulls up and asks me where the library is again. This time I bring up the fact that he's asked me where the library is 4 times in the past 6 years. He apologizes and then says that explains why I look familiar and asks if I want a ride. I tell him no and he drives off. 2 years later, I'm walking down the same street and he pulls up again and asks where the library is, and I bust out laughing and he gives me a puzzled look. I inform him that he has asked me this about 10 times. He apologizes and asks me if I worked for him before and I say no. He asks me if I want to, and I ask him what he'd like me to do. His work proposition was inappropriate to say the least, and I laugh and tell him to never ask me where the library is again. It's a really strange series of coincidences to happen so consistently throughout my life. Was it more than just a coincidence? What do you think? My uncle passed away some time ago to liver cirrhosis, but a few months before he died I saw a weird dream that I still remember quite clearly. In this dream there was my sister, me, my sister's deceased father who passed in 2016, and my uncle. Now, little note that my sister's father and uncle were best friends, and the dad was also pretty close with me. In this dream, I walked to an apartment and rang the doorbell. My sister's father opened the door and I walked in and saw my uncle and sister in there too. But my sister quickly left, as if she couldn't be there. I went into the kitchen and her father and my uncle were talking to me. But there was an invisible barrier in the middle of the floor that I couldn't cross. But the uncle and my sister's father were on the other side of it. My sister's dad hugged me and told me it was going to be alright. And then I woke up. The first thought I had when I woke up was that my uncle was going to die soon. Then, the week before he died, I saw a dream of my grandma being hospitalized. This is because my grandpa's mental state would drop when he'd die, and it did once he died, but otherwise she's okay. Then I woke up. The first thought I had, once again, is that my uncle is going to die, but it was stronger. I could tell the time had come. The night he died, I felt a sharp pain in the middle of my stomach, and I burst out crying for a reason I didn't know. I could also feel a familiar presence watching me, and I thought it was very odd. The following morning, I heard a song on the radio, a song my uncle played for me when I was little, and the balcony door slammed open. An hour later, my mum called me and told me he had passed away.
When my mum lived in Biloxi, Mississippi, and had just turned 6, she was on her way back from school and took a shortcut through a hole in a fence to get to the church for choir practice. But she got to the other side and was making her way down the street while carrying books. A car showed up behind her and began following her. My mum was already used to this kind of thing since it happened to her quite a bit, sadly. Noticing something was off and slowly turning her head to peek at the driver, a look at the man's face told her all she needed to know. The guy tried to grab her attention, but when she sped up her pace, he slammed the brakes and tried to jump out of the car to grab her. But she had already thrown her books to the ground and was running towards the church as fast as she could. He got back into the car and hit the gas to catch up, but she had already made it to the back door of the building, and as it turned out it was locked, and no one would open it either, since they couldn't hear her banging on the door. So she slowly went back up to peek around the corner to see if he was still there, and he was still trying to find her. Here is when she suddenly heard some music coming from the parking lot across the street, where they usually had some old circus-style looking wagons standing around. They were all splintered, rusty, their colours faded, and they were locked. But when she looked over there was a single one that looked brand new with its door open, and inside there stood a middle-aged man, who looked like he could have been Italian, who called her over with a waving hand and a smile. From afar, he asked if she would like a snow cone as it was such a hot day, and as he said that, he had stepped onto the top stair of the wagon and stared directly at the guy in the car. He literally stared him down, and because he did that, the guy took off. Meanwhile, my mum, albeit cautious, had just gotten to the front of the wagon and told the man, "I don't have any money." With a smile, he said it was free, and began making her a snow cone when her sister came out of the church to look for my mum and asked what she was doing. She too was confused to see this brand new looking wagon out there since there were never any before. He proceeded to ask her if she'd like a snow cone too, and then made her one as well. With their snow cones in hand and thanking the man for his kindness, they waved and said goodbye while he stood in the doorway and watched them return to the safety of the church. As they reached the building, one of the church members, who was kind of mean, told them they weren't allowed to bring their snow cones inside, so they had to turn around and go back to eat it quickly, but couldn't finish it fast enough because of brain freeze. But before going in, they looked up to see if the snow cone man could see them throwing the snow cones in the trash, but he was gone. And while the wagon was still there, the colours were now faded. It was splintered, full of spider webs, and was locked. No more music either, just dead silence. My mum said their mouths had dropped, and they ran over there to take a closer look. It really was nothing but an old, dusty, rusty wagon. After some speculation, her sister said it must have just been an angel, but she just froze and didn't say anything. When she told the church member about the man giving the snow cones to them because the woman had asked where they got them from in the first place, she told the two of them that there was never someone selling anything over there since decades and didn't believe them. My mum just told her that the leftovers were still in the bin. That woman then basically just told them to stop lying and making up stories and went back inside, and my mum looked at her sister, shrugged, and shook her head.
I was talking to my parents recently about scary interactions I had while growing up, and they reminded me of one I've completely forgotten about. I was 7 years old and very naive, and believed whatever was said to me. I got bullied quite a lot in school, therefore leaving me with little friends, and decided to join an online game, Moshi Monsters, if anyone remembers it. Basically, from what I remember of this website, you could make other friends and talk with them quite easily. My family only had one main computer at that point, so after school, I would often have to wait until my mum, dad, or brother were finished using it so that I could play. I met a lot of people on there that I became friends with, and eventually I met Candy. Candy told me she was an 8-year-old girl, and we would spend hours talking almost every single day. It was a harmless online friendship, or so I thought, because again I was young and naive. One day, Candy asked where I live. I told her Canada. She then asked which county and city, so I told her. I thought she was just curious. Thankfully, she never asked my address, and I didn't give it to her. A few weeks later, Candy told me she was traveling to my city and wanted to hang out. So I asked my parents, and they were obviously very weirded out and concerned by this, so they decided to start reading our conversations. I never understood why. I chalked it up to them being overprotective parents. Candy eventually told me she was in my city and asked if she could meet me at the park by my house. First of all, since I never told her the area I lived in, I wasn't sure how she knew I had a big park by my house, but I also thought that maybe she just assumed there were parks in every neighborhood. She then said that we could meet by the ice skating rink, but she wanted me to walk there alone. My parents read this and flipped out. Our neighborhood is the only one with an ice rink in my town. My parents freaked out at me and thought I told this stranger my address, but I promised that I had not, and eventually they were able to read all our messages and can see that I didn't. Nonetheless, my parents were concerned. They had no idea who this person was or how they figured this out, so they banned me from talking to her. I was upset, but I obliged. After about a year, I had outgrown the website and was on new things. My family had planned a trip to Las Vegas, and we went. While we were staying there, I was really bored in my hotel room, and decided to check on how my monster was doing. I logged on to see hundreds of messages from Candy. Don't you want to see me? How could you ignore me? I thought we were friends. Mainly things along that line, until one message stood out. It was a few days earlier and it read, "I know you're in Vegas. I live here. Let's hang out. Just get away from your parents." I was shocked. How could she know? I hadn't logged into the website for a year. I was a kid and had zero social media, and it just didn't make sense. Again, I showed my parents and they were freaked out and basically banned me from the website in general. I never logged in again, or spoke to Candy again either. Some things are best left that way. As seniors in high school, my BFF and I spent the night in the school after everyone had packed up and gone home. My mum thought I was staying at my best friend's house and vice versa. We were the type of kids parents trusted. We camped out in the Corrali room because it had a secure closet shared with the band room with locking doors if things got creepy. We talked, laughed, ate sugary treats, and drank copious amounts of Jolt. The lights in the hall remained on until around 1 a.m., where they were shut off several times in a row. We started to freak out a little bit because while this went on, someone in the hall shouted loudly. The door to our room opened slowly and we quickly ran to the couch next to the secret closet. We sat there absolutely still and watched a custodian come in to start sweeping the room. He walked exactly perpendicular to where we sat and looked through us as if we weren't even there. He stared in the exact spot we were sitting but didn't notice. We ran into the closet and quietly closed the door. We struggled with going home or staying. The secure closet has an exit to the outdoors, but it was so late that neither of us would be able to justify strolling into our respective homes. We watched the same custodian, whom we'd never seen before tonight, clean the band room through the window in the closet door. He finally left and we nervously checked the windows of the doors until dawn broke. We finally thought it was a reasonable enough time to exit as classes would be starting soon. We'd headed over to the Dunkin' Donuts for a caffeinated drink and a donut. As we walked through the breezeway that separated the 9th to 10th graders from the 11th to 12th graders to stop at our lockers, we found 3 tall pink candles lit on the oversized sill, 2 hockey sticks crossed on the ground, and weird music playing from a cassette player from 1999. We booked it out of there as quickly as we could, and never saw the custodian again. This happened to me in 2010. I was a college student at a school in a big city which unfortunately wasn't in the best part of town. At the time, I was living in an off-campus apartment that didn't have dedicated parking spots, so I always tried to park my car along either side of the building under a streetlight. However, on this particular day, I was only able to get a spot on the street behind the building. Around midnight, I left my apartment to drive to my then boyfriend's house in another part of the city. He was a musician and just getting home from a gig, hence the late-night meetup. I hated being outside the city alone at night, but I hadn't seen my boyfriend in a while and thought I could quickly make it to my car without issue. To get from my apartment to my car, I had to walk out the front door of my building, turn the corner, walk alongside the building, which was the length and width of a city block, and turn down the back street where my car was parked. All in all, this should have taken no more than a few minutes. As I turn the corner to walk alongside my apartment building, I see a man walking directly towards me. He immediately starts calling out to me and saying, "Hey, hey!" But he's far enough up the street that I think I can make it to my car before he makes it to me. I quicken my pace, and so does he. He keeps calling out to me saying, "Hey, can you help me? I'm homeless, I need to go home." Obviously that made no sense, and the closer he got, the more I could tell he was drunk, on drugs, or both. He was getting closer to me, and all the while calling out to me and asking for money. When I suddenly realized that I couldn't make it to my car before he would make it to me. So I stopped dead in my tracks underneath the streetlight on the side of the building. I always walked with my keys in my hand so I would never be struck digging around for them in an opportune time. Much like this,
and thanks to my mom and making sure I was always safe in the city, my keys were complete with a keychain of mace. By this time, the guy was a foot away from me, aggressively asking for money and telling me he needed to get home. I told him I had no money and couldn't help him, and he moved closer until he was inches away from me. I picked up my mace, and in that moment the streetlight shone on it perfectly, so this creep saw it and backed away. To this day, I swear I had a guardian angel watching over me. This guy could have grabbed me, snatched my purse, or gotten violent, yet the mere sight of my mace was thankfully enough to spook him. He quickly walked past me down the street, and I sprinted to my car and sped away, shaking, and needless to say, I never, ever walked to my car alone at night again. One of the most frustrating parts of this encounter is that it happened within sight of a city surveillance camera that wasn't functioning. A few months prior to this incident, someone tried to break into my car, and when I called the police and asked them to review the surveillance, they told me the cameras in that area didn't work, and hadn't for a long time. So I know there was no way this guy would have been caught either, which kept me constantly on edge. So much so that I moved out of the city entirely a few months later. I've had a few experiences with sleep paralysis, and stuff like where I think I see a demon, or my soul is actually being claimed by Satan. But this one was different. I woke up in the middle of the night and could feel a presence to my left. It felt cold. It felt like an icy blue orb, and I could feel exactly where it was located. It didn't make much sense, because my bed was right up against the left wall, so it would have been floating in the air about 2 stories up. I hadn't even thought about moving, as its presence was so interesting, and I was entirely focused on that. It went through the wall. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. As it passed through the wall, it took form, somewhat like a human shape. Then it came around my bed to the bottom right corner. It crouched down and then jumped onto me, straddling me. I can't remember if I couldn't move before or just hadn't tried, but when it was on top of me, I definitely couldn't move at all. I was doing some work that night and had fallen asleep with my laptop, which was a little to my left and had fallen during the shifting of my sleep. It was angled towards me still, and the subtle glow from the illuminated screen allowed me to partially see this being. I couldn't make out the details because the being was translucent like glass, so I could only make out parts of it from the edges. I'm kind of arrogant, and like I've said, have been attacked in a similar fashion before, although this one was certainly the most brazen. So for some reason I actually wasn't scared and more annoyed. So then I felt it pull out a weapon like a dagger, and it tried to stab me in the center of my chest, but it didn't work, like I was wearing a bulletproof vest, and the dagger would not penetrate. Before, the way it moved and when it jumped happened fairly quickly, but by this time it was like we were telepathically linked in some way. I could feel its feelings, and it felt like it could feel mine. No words came from the being though, only emotions. I could feel its surprise and frustration when the dagger did not go through. The feeling of being also turned from blue to red, then a burning red. It kept trying to stab me over and over, never penetrating, and the being kept getting angrier and angrier, just super angry and frustrated, since it didn't work in the first few attempts. I was quite confident it wasn't going to work at all, so I began to sort of heckle it into my head, which I could feel it here was like, I give up already. It's gonna work, and stuff like that. This only made him angrier and stabbed faster, and after several attempts and me getting tired of it, I prayed. I was a Christian at the time, and as soon as I began praying, it sort of flew away and just turned into nothing. I'm a skeptic, and think most of the stuff that happened to me was probably due to sleep paralysis, but for all those experiences I just remember them the next day. What makes me think this was an actual experience of some kind was that as soon as it flew away, I was still awake and I could move again. I felt it float away and stayed awake in a through-line fashion. I didn't wake up or go back to sleep since my laptop was right there. I spent the rest of the night Googling and trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Eventually I did fall back asleep,
I checked my history the next day, and all the history of me trying to research what it was were all right there. That's probably the craziest experience I've had. I could feel it was shocked and surprised, like it thought it was going to be a quick and easy mission, but it wasn't.
A few years ago, I got into a car crash on the highway, and my car veered off the road into the woods before hitting a few trees. I was hit in the head pretty bad during this, but remember everything from the moment clearly. I was wearing a pair of sunglasses that my mother had bought me the day before, which had obviously fallen off, so my first instinct was to find my glasses so I didn't lose them. I spot them on the floor, and as I try to reach them, a tall man starts knocking on the passenger window, asking if I'm all right. I look over, only seeing the body of the man as he wasn't leaning down and looking inside, and I just said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I just dropped my glasses and need to get them." Next thing I know, this man is grabbing me from under my arm and pulling me out through the passenger side door. He stands me up and says, "You'll be all right. Just walk out to the road and sit on the railing." Almost automatically, I start doing exactly what the man said without thinking, or even turning around to see what he looked like. I get to the railing and tell exactly what happened to everyone that stopped to check on me, including the paramedics and police officers. It wasn't until a few days later when I found out there was no man that helped me. The first people who stopped by to help only saw me either sitting on the rail already or walking to it to sit. They didn't see the man I described, and neither did the police or paramedics. I have a family member who really believes in spirits, and she believes it was my grandfather who helped me. He passed away 3 months before the accident, and thinks that the reason I blindly listened without thinking or even looking back to the man was because I already knew and trusted the voice. I personally have no idea what to believe, but I just know someone helped me that day.
This took place back in 2016, when Pokemon Go first launched and took the world by storm. I had downloaded the game and was instantly addicted, so in the middle of this I went to my dad's game shop. He was set up in a place that was only really open on the weekends, but we had some business there during the week. So to pass the time I started up my game, figured I could at least get a few catches while I was there. When I started it up, I noticed there was a Pokestop about a 10-minute walk from my dad's store. Awesome, even still in the plaza. I let him know where I'm going and head out to spin it. I go back and forth a few times, spinning and heading back, and my dad doesn't complain as I'm actually getting some exercise for a change. I go back one last time and get my spin. Now notice there's a large van nearby. I didn't really note it too much at first. The place was open during the weekends with more permanent shops available to rent, but it wasn't uncommon for shop owners to come by to check on things during the week, like my dad did. I get my spin, walk off, and the van immediately starts to drive out. I get a bad feeling and quickly head back to my dad's shop. The way the place was set up is there are multiple roads. If they wanted to leave, they would just continue down that one that they were on and circle their way out. So I made a quick turnaround on one of the smaller paths. Of course, they followed me down the road. Despite literally being minutes away from my dad's shop, I'm panicking a bit. I exit out the game, and I'm about to call him. Thankfully, by some miracle, the owner of the plaza appears in his car, excitedly asking me what team I'm on. We talk for a bit, and I'm grateful there's someone I know. I look and can see the van in the reflection of the owner's vehicle in front of me. Now, to all of those who thought maybe I was overreacting in this situation, that may be it was a coincidence. This will show you it wasn't. As I looked and saw them beginning to back up in the reflection, after they made it all the way to the road they'd turned from, I glanced back, noticing they had parked themselves back at the Pokestop again. I bid the owner farewell as he drove off, didn't bother to tell him what happened, and while it was helpful to get these guys off my back, he would have done nothing. Garbage like this happens all the time and he refuses to call police. I immediately get on the phone with my dad and keep him on the entire time, jogging back the last little bit. I tell my dad what happened, and he said I probably shouldn't go back there during the week. I agree. So to the people in the van, let's not meet.
This happened in the late 90s, maybe early noughties. It was probably when I was between 8 to 10 years old and in the Cub Scouts. Our troop would pretty much always go to the same campground. They had maybe 8 to 10 big cabins, and each cabin had a small kitchen, a dining area with 4 to 6 picnic tables, and a giant room with about a dozen bunk beds lined up along the 2 walls. There would be a wood-burning stove in the center. In our troop, all of the boys' dads would go camping too. The dads would take the bottom bunk, and the boys would be on top. This particular time, we got to a corner bunk closest to the front door. My best friend and his dad, a Vietnam vet and tough guy, were in the bunk over. So a little bit about me. I've always been a very shy and socially anxious person. I only ever really spoke when spoken to by an adult, and only really talked much with my best friend. This was just a one-nighter camping field trip, and after a normal day it was now bedtime. It's cold out there, so it's a fire in the stove casting a warm reddish glow around the big room, but it's still dark inside anyway. I couldn't remember if I couldn't fall asleep or if I woke up, but the point is I was awake. The whole room was dimly lit, and it was like shooting stars in a light show above the room, in the peaks and above the bunks. It looked like a massive party. I couldn't believe it. I look over at my friend to see if he's awake, and he's sound asleep. I look back at the light show, and a dimly lit light swoops down and comes towards me. As it gets closer, I see a little girl's face, but with big 2 to 3 inch black circles at her eyes. Her face is about a foot from mine, and we just stare at each other. It was kind of like the ghostly apparition that comes out of the Ark in Indiana Jones, but she didn't transform and was not menacing. I don't remember if she was floating or if I was just looking down at her on the floor as she looked up at me. I didn't do or say anything. I didn't scream or try to wake anyone. I'm not sure if I was frozen or didn't want to bother anyone, but was just very curious. And after staring at each other for a little while, I start to freak out, wondering what I should do. So I roll over, face the wall, close my eyes, and eventually get to sleep. We all left the next morning. I did not feel good, and never told anyone about it. A few years later, on another camping trip, some of the kids were talking about ghosts, and I guess there was a rumor that one of the cabins was haunted. I bet I can tell anyone for free which one it was specifically. This happened in summer of 2008. I was at a sleepover birthday party at my friend's house. You see, I live in rural western Pennsylvania. All you need to know about that side of the state is that if you aren't living in Pittsburgh and Erie, you're probably living in an oil town that went bust decades ago. Oh, and you're probably in an isolated forest too. My family did okay in spite of the economical depression area we live. Now, my friend had money. His family weren't Wall Street investors or anything, but in a town like mine it was noticeable. He had a big house, a huge yard, a tree house, a trampoline, big screen TVs everywhere, and every video game console ever made. You might think I was only friends with the kid because of the stuff he had, which honestly isn't true. He's probably in the top 5 nicest people I'd ever met. His family were amazing. They took me in for a while when my mum was in hospital, and I still keep in touch with them. So, rich, good guy, etc., who had lots of friends. His birthday parties were legendary among kids in our town. Usually they involved one of those closed canopy tents outside with movie projection inside, along with soft-serve ice cream machines and slushy. The party in 2008, when he was turning 13 or 14, was a little more low-key. There were a few less people than usual, and there weren't any tents and projectors. We played video games for the first part of the night, and then started to play flashlight tag when it got dark. I know that the rules to flashlight tag can be depending on who's playing, and my friend and I used to play like group hide and seek. The hiders would go hide somewhere dark, sometimes alone, sometimes together. If there was a great spot, the seekers got the flashlights and also some cool walkie-talkies. As I said before, the yard we played in was huge, and there were a lot of places to hide. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. We mostly hid around the tree house as well as climb over some trees inside the yard itself.
The only thing we had to worry about was when a cop drove by. Obviously, we weren't doing anything illegal, but we just didn't want to explain we were sneaking around the house at 11 at night with flashlights. My friend's yard ends in some pretty thick woods. My own house, which is a few miles down the road, has some wooded areas around as well, but not like this. After you leave my friend's backyard, there's about 15 to 20 miles of wilderness before the next town. He does have neighbors on one side, and all of it is going to become important in a bit. On this particular time, I was one of the seekers. My group and I were waiting in the house for the other group to hide. We were mostly drinking slushies and messing around. We had just come out the house and started our search when we heard a lot of yelling. Suddenly, the entire other group came rushing back to the house. They went inside, and my group, really confused at this point, followed them in. It took a few minutes for everyone to calm down and explain what was happening, and the story went like this. That round, they had all decided to hide in the woods since we hadn't been back there yet. They had gone a number of places inside, but were still in sight of the house, looking farther inside the woods. They caught sight of a figure at the edge of their vision. It took them a little time while figuring out what they were looking for in the dark. They thought it might be a tree or a deer or something, but they kept focusing on it. When they were sure that the shape was human, they started yelling and sprinted back to the house. When everyone was finally inside and mostly settled down, I was freaking out, along with some of the other boys. A few of the people in my group, including my friend who was throwing the party, were skeptical. They were pretty sure that the other group was just trying to scare us. In fact, my friend was almost angry about it. He was going to march off to the woods to check the situation out himself. They stopped him and said that they should only go back to check as a group, or wake up his parents who were asleep upstairs. Most of the people who hadn't gone into the woods actually found this pretty fun in a weird way, and it was like being a thriller movie. Plus, we were in a low-crime neighborhood, and there were enough of us that one unarmed person shouldn't have bothered us. Even if it was a hoax, it would be a fun scare, and we came up with a plan to investigate the woods. The majority of the guys decided to go back into the woods with flashlights and walkie-talkies. They also planned to bring my friend's dog, but that didn't work out. The dog was a golden retriever/collie mix, and was the furthest thing from a guard dog, unless you feared being licked to death. He also got most of his exercise by fetching tennis balls in the big yard, so he was not used to being led on a leash. I waited at the house with another scaredy cat kid with the other walkie-talkie, ready to wake up my friend's parents or call the cops. I wasn't taking this situation very well, but really didn't show it. I tend to seem pretty calm on the outside when I'm a nervous wreck on the inside, and at least I attempted to calm the other scaredy cat down. After a few minutes and some excited chatter on the walkie-talkie, the investigators returned in a similar state as the original group. There was a lot of shouting, and it took a few minutes to get the story straight. This is what happened to them. They had gone to the edge of the woods like the original group had done. It took a few minutes of searching since the figure had been spotted in the thicker brush that wasn't easy to reach. One of the kids swung his flashlight around until he caught sight of something before yelling and running back to the house. Some of the other boys who had gotten the same glimpse inside the flashlight had behaved similarly. They confirmed that they had seen a person. He was mostly obscured behind a small tree. The features that they could make out from that brief moment were of a male who was on the taller side with longish hair. One of the boys who had seen him thought he might be wearing some light flannel. Apparently he had made no move to approach them and had just cocked his head out a little to stare from behind the tree. It was at this point my friend's mum finally came downstairs after all the commotion. We explained the situation to her, and she locked all the doors and told us to stay inside and to tell her if we saw anything else. She explained that part of the woods were going into what was probably not their land anyway. They just had the closest house to it. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. We were situated on an air mattress in my friend's game room. The really frightened kid actually took to sleeping underneath one,
Just before sunrise, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I came to, everyone was awake and eating pancakes on the patio. My friend's mum was with them. She had checked the woods that morning and hadn't seen anything amiss. We were all a little on edge, but things were pretty normal beside that. When my parents came to pick me up, I was reminded of the fact that I only lived about 2 miles from my friend's house, a walk that took 10 minutes or less. Even at home, I struggled to sleep for a while, just thinking about how easy it would be for the man in the woods to show up in my yard. Well, a few weeks later, I'm playing video games at my friend's house again, and I bring up the subject, and he was very dismissive of it. It was strange, but he was pretty short with me about it. It was like he wanted me to drop it. None of his behavior fit his personality at all. He did come up with an explanation, though. Apparently, one of the neighbors had a son a few years older than us. He was tall with long hair, and my friend explained that he could be a jerk and was pretty weird. The way he said weird may have indicated some mental condition. My friend's explanation was that the kid had seen us playing hide and seek in the woods and wanted to scare us. That did make me feel a little better at first. It did seem reasonable on the surface, and there was a good chance that actually happened. However, there are a few things that don't sit right with me. In my experience, when someone is trying to scare you, there's like, haha, I got you at the end. Most people would want to reveal the whole thing in a good-natured way, or they just want to show you how dumb you look for nothing. Back when we had the sleepovers in our tents, one of my friend's older brothers would rustle the outside before popping his head to see if he scared us. Both of his brothers had moved out of the house by the night of the incident, and the person in the woods did nothing like that. He may have just been trying to scare us and went all in on the whole thing, whereas his only pleasure was knowing that he had scared us. Or if this kid really did have problems, maybe he didn't understand how the pranks were supposed to go. His explanation also brought back an early memory of mine. I'd been going over to my friend's house for close to 10 years at that point. In one of the early years, I remember playing a game with my friend and one of his neighbors who lived across the street. Both my friends and the neighbor had crabapple trees in their yard. We played a game of basically dodgeball with moldy apples thrown across the road. The game ended when the neighbor, who was a few years older, chucked a crabapple at my friend's head as hard as he could. It was absolutely nailed to my friend, and he was on the ground crying. I brought him inside where his parents asked me what was wrong, and I told them about the game and the neighbor kid. When he finished crying, his parents scolded him that they'd warned him of this. They just said the neighbor's kid was not nice, and for the record, he did not have long hair. But this was a number of years prior. Now, I don't know if this was the neighbor that my friend had pinned the blame on, which brings me to some other disturbing things. My friend never gave me the suspect's name, even when I pressed him on it. More unsettling was the fact that my friend was not amongst the kids who had actually seen the guy directly. This was just his explanation for what happened. I don't think my friend was actually trying to cover anything. I think he was worried that I wouldn't come round anymore if I didn't feel safe. That was the last time I had a sleepover at his house, not because of the incident, but because we were entering high school and overnight parties started meaning something else entirely. My friend's explanation does seem plausible, and that makes it pretty creepy on its own. The alternates are even more frightening, and I don't want to think about the kind of guy who stalks teenagers in the woods at night. A few months ago in the middle of summer, I dreamt of a snow-covered forest. It was dark and the woods were asleep. There were plenty of tracks through the snow, and many of them were child-sized footprints. As I knew there was an orphanage nearby, the snow was muddy in places and squished under my feet. The orphanage was a big 2-story building with white walls. I could see nightlights on through the windows, but I stayed in the tree line waiting. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for until I saw it. A dark, black mud puddle that seemed to be made of shadow. The mud slid to the side of the building and slowly started to slide up the side towards one of the windows. But I stopped it, sliding my hand into the mud, which was neither warm nor cold. I grabbed hold of something solid and pulled on the mud, dragging out a long, dripping sort of spine, thick with black mud that clung to my fingers. The more I pulled, the thicker it got,
until a whole shadow stood in front of me, mud peeling back and dripping down until I could make out an animal's skull that appeared to be a wolf or dog's, but with bright, unsettling blue lights in the sockets and tall black horns. In my hand, I clutched the small end of a long, spiny, almost mangy tail. The air was still and silent as I stared at it. The thing had the lower half of a goat, but instead of fur, it had caked on mud that swirled and swished. Its torso and arms were hidden by the black mud. "Who are you?" it asked me. It sounded like the echo of a voice heard from far away, as if from some tall mountain. "How can you see me?" I tried to explain that I didn't know why I could see it, or what it was, but it seemed more fearful of me than I of it. So then I brought it to the tree line, its tail still in my hand, and we sat and spoke. It removed its skull, which it used as a mask, and the black mud fell to reveal a pale human form, pale and blue-tinted, as if it lacked blood. The eyes were the same empty blue light, and the horns stayed embedded in its head. He explained that he was a demon that feeds on life, by consuming the tiny bit that escaped when you dream of dying. He explained that they called these bits of life a fold, and they count each fold as a year of their own existence. He also referred to the mud on him as folds, and that his kind communicates with each other and breeds by mixing their folds. When I woke up, I could remember everything clearly, even the part where I told it I was going to wake up and that I hoped I'd see it again. I never got a name for it, but the closest thing I could find was a Japanese baku, which is a demon that eats dreams or nightmares. If anyone has any info, it would be greatly appreciated.
My dad was in the car with his best friend and the friend's daughter driving on the motorway. The daughter is diabetic, and during the drive she started to show symptoms that she was running low on sugar, except my dad and his friend had gone without any snacks for her. They start to panic looking for a place to get off the motorway. All the while her symptoms start to get worse. It gets to the point where she begins to have a panic attack. I don't know why they stopped, but they did. There, on the hard shoulder of the motorway in the middle of nowhere with a young girl hyperventilating, which makes her symptoms worse. And then out of nowhere, a stranger shows up, just an ordinary guy walking along it. He walks right up to the car, hands my dad's friend a chocolate bar and walks away without another word. They gave the girl the chocolate bar and sure enough she begins to feel better. But when they look back down the motorway, neither my dad nor his friend could see where the guy had gone. My dad is religious, his friend is not. And even so, they both agreed that something supernatural had just taken place.
One time I had been at my local Walmart and smelled a foul stench. I turned my head in the direction of said odor, and there was an elderly man far too close for comfort. He was breathing very shallow, with his feeble-looking hand stretched out towards my face. I quickly moved aisle, as I heard what sounded like grunting behind me. He was attempting to follow me, but from the look, he was far too slow. I was obviously spooked, so I quickly made my way to self-checkout and began to ring up all my items so that I could get the hell out of there. I didn't see this man anywhere, so I figured maybe he thought I was someone else, or maybe he had suffered from dementia or something. I forgot about what had happened by the time I got home. Now, out of my mind, I unloaded my minivan, then took a shower and got situated. You know, the usual. My dog started barking profusely for some reason, and my mind immediately jumped to the thought of the old man, but I didn't see anyone or anything. Later that evening I went to check my mail, since I had forgotten it days earlier. As I reached for my hand in there were dentures in my mailbox. I threw them across my lawn and scurried inside. I secured all the locks of my house and called my friend, who thought I was tweaking. She got there and I showed her the dentures on the lawn. She thought I was playing with her. The night continued. Everything was normal and nothing odd happened. She left the next morning, and I took my dog on a walk. Down the street at the library on a bench sat the old man. He smiled and a few of his teeth were missing, in the exact same spot as the dentures. He started yelling to me about how I was doomed to go to hell, how I'm Lucifer's wife, and began to run at me. This time much quicker than at the store. Luckily there was a librarian at the window who called the police. The man was on the run and had a warrant for his arrest for possession of indecent images of underage minors and aggravated assault on a minor of a sexual nature. He was on the local registry. I really hope he was put away and in a position where he can't harm anyone else.
One day when I was at Arabic school, my friends and I were pretty much skipping class near the bathrooms. There was a long hallway with a door that had a window in it. I was bored, so I looked down the hallway, and right behind the door was a grey figure. I got spooked and told my friends. They saw it too. But this time, the head was floating above the torso. We went back to class and told everyone, only for the lights to flicker and hear a knock at the door. When the teacher opened the door, there was no one. It was a long hallway too, so you couldn't run very easily without being spotted. After that, the door was shut, and we had to find a different class.
When I was 19, I merchandised perennials at Home Depot in the garden section. It was mid-June, so there was a lot of product to cull, organize, and rows of racks containing flowers that had to be put out. I was finishing up one day, sweeping the concrete from the mess I'd made, when this old guy in his early 60s walks up to me uncomfortably close. He said something along the lines of, "Well, you're a strong, hard-working young man." I wasn't paying much attention to him, but still trying to be polite while clearing up so that I could be done. He kept saying weird stuff like how good of a work I was doing and how strong I am. At this point, he had one hand on my shoulder and the other gently on my stomach. All I could think of is, there's no way this guy's doing this. He then pointed to the rack of perennials that lined the aisle. "Look at all these flowers. We need a big, strong man to put them away." I kid you not. Not only did he pause, but he looked down at me while he did it. I scrambled away from his touch, laughing awkwardly because I was pretty much still a kid, but I wanted to throw up. I just kept walking and asking myself what the hell just happened. I could see him from the corner of my eye. As I swept, he was just standing there watching me. I looked up to meet his gaze, and I just glared back until he looked away and left. I was scared to leave Home Depot that day, paranoid he'd follow me. Every old guy I saw after that, I was hyper-aware of for a while. As a male, you don't think of it happening to you, so you never realize how disgusting it feels. At last year's Relay for Life at around 2 to 3 a.m., I was sitting with my friends and must have dozed off. I usually can't sleep, and at this moment I've been awake for over 48 hours. I guess I was sleepwalking, but my friends recalled me getting up, mumbling something and stumbling away. They thought I was just getting something from my car and coming back. I recall waking up at the parking lot near my car, laying on the ground, and as I get up, I take very small steps all the way to my car and back out again. I constantly wake up in my car in the middle of different roads, as my car is slowly rolling towards or parked. I live around 20 minutes away from the event, but I made it home at my house around 4 hours since I got away from my friends, so around 6 something in the morning. When I woke up in my bed, I was covered in blood and scratches, but my car was in perfect condition, so I did not get into a crash. The following days I asked everyone I was with that night if they recall me doing anything, but nobody knew what happened or how I'm alive. Sleepwalking really is terrifying. I've had an extremely hard time going to sleep, and also have a small history of sleepwalking when I was younger. I'm not sure if I'm insomniac or not, but truthfully, the event was quite frightening. I was working at a gas station the graveyard shift. Some guy runs in all tattered up, sweaty and exhausted, and frantically asked me, "What is today?" I told him the date and he's like, "No, the year." So I told him and he yells, "Oh crap," and ran out the door. I thought it was a prank or something, so I didn't give it a second thought. Moments later, I opened my phone and all my contacts were as they were months ago. My wallpaper was back the same and my icons and my ex back in my phone. Her parents, her siblings, her old friends from school. The only thing that didn't come back were my picture and texts. But all those contacts that I knew I deleted soon after I broke up with her, which was 5 months before this happened. I don't believe in a lot of supernatural stuff, but I often wonder, what if the guy was a time traveler and he warped too close to me and it somehow affected my phone? Far-fetched, I know, but even so. I was 16 at the time of this event. It was 1986, in Indianapolis, at Union Station. I think it was around Christmas time or right after. My mum, 2-year-old sister, and 21-year-old uncle were there and visited together. Uncle still lived in Indianapolis, and we had moved to southwestern Indiana at the time. My mum, baby sister, and I were getting ready to leave and drive back home. I'd already bundled up in my coat, scarf, and gloves, and it was getting hot inside Union Station. My mum, God rest her soul, could talk a dead man back to life, so I was waiting for her long-winded wrap-up. I told her I was getting too hot and was going to step out for a minute. My mum nodded her acknowledgement, and out I went. It was cold, but not too bad. No snow, nor wind, just perfect to cool down from being overheated from being inside, but not wanting to play the on and off again game with my coat and other winter wear. Bear in mind I was 16. If this were to happen to me today at 53, things would have gone much differently. I was always a polite kid, almost to the point of being docile. I was always apologetic if I thought I'd screw up in any way. So, not even a minute or so after standing outside, right by the double doors that served as an entrance and exit, a white Chevette pulls up, with 2 big dudes with crew cuts just sitting in the driver and passenger seats. They were at least 6'5", probably 200 to 80 pounds each, and I figured they were probably from our local fort with the crew cuts, but that was just an assumption due to my family's military service history. Immediately after seeing me, they stop at the curb, roll down the window and smile. "Hey, come here, we want to talk to you." I, being 16, and now just realizing what this looked like, apologetic instead of alarmed, I looked up and saw the incandescent streetlight burning above me. Looked at both of them, with a typical apology saying, "I'm sorry, this isn't what it looks like." My poor mind was reeling with, great, they think I'm at home. More so than actually thinking I may be in a dangerous situation. They kept reiterating that they just wanted to talk with me. I kept explaining that this isn't what it appeared to be, and that I apologize if I gave off the wrong impression. It wasn't dawning on me in my embarrassment that they weren't listening to a word I was saying at all. All of a sudden, a passenger gets out and starts moving rather quickly towards me, looking like an alpha wolf staring at a T-bone steak. The switch was immediate, if not only him but myself. I was no longer apologetic and I was no longer embarrassed. I was pissed. "You don't have to get your car if you just want to talk to me. I can hear you just fine." I'm normally docile and quiet, but the Irish and Scandinavian side of me came out in full force. I bolted inside where Mum was still yammering, and upon seeing me, she and my uncle were alarmed because seeing my family again drove home the fact that I didn't think I'd see them ever if he'd have got me in that car, and I was shaken. I told my mum what happened, and my uncle asked what were they driving. I told him a white Chevette, and Mum yelled for him to get them. As he bolted to the door, he ran 5 to 6 miles a day. Mum was livid, but I could tell my baby sister was getting scared, so I tried to calm her down. My uncle came back a few minutes later, winded and worn out. When he caught his breath, he said he caught up with them at a stoplight and made a move towards their car, but the light turned green. Well, that ended our little Wally World trip, and back home to southwestern Indiana we went. The moral of the story is, don't let manners supersede your safety. Who wants to die for being polite?
A few years ago, me and 3 friends went to a cross-country summer camp that took place at a fancy private boarding school. I was 16 at the time, and my 3 friends were 17. We were in the same dorm room. Every 2 rooms were connected by a bathroom, so every 8 shared a bathroom. The boys were on the ground floor, and the girls, us, were upstairs. One day after our morning run, me and one of my friends, Emma, went back to our dorm. The other 2 stayed out, and so did the 4 girls in the room next to us. I know for a fact because they were all going to play soccer together, and they left their side of the bathroom door open, so I could see no one was in there. Me and Emma got changed and then sat on our beds and talked for about an hour. We then started laughing about something, and a few seconds in, I heard a deep man's voice laughing with us. I immediately stopped laughing, and so did Emma. We looked at each other silently for about a minute, and I felt like I was frozen. Then I said to get lunch, or something like that, and we grabbed our stuff and left. I thought about it, but was too scared to look in the closet as we left. We told my coach, he was a counsellor too, and then, when we got back in, one of the women's counsellors helped us look around, but we didn't find anything. Nothing appeared to have been moved or stolen. Here's what I think happened. Our room was right next to the emergency staircase. The boys weren't allowed upstairs, so the counsellors guarded the main staircase, but not the emergency ones. We also didn't lock our doors since we were constantly going in and out. I think 1 or 2 of the boys came back from their run because everyone else thought it would be funny to sneak into the girls' room. They went up to the emergency stairs since there was no counsellors around, and went into the first room they saw, which would have been ours. They probably hid in the closet and watched us change before frightening us. Creepy in several respects, to be honest. When I was 6 years old, I was at a park with my friend, Fred, along with our parents. I went up to my mum and explained that I needed to use the restroom. She asked if I'd bring my friend with me, and as we're walking to the restroom, Fred stops at the water fountain for a drink. I continued inside and immediately stumbled upon something strange. A large man was in the restroom but not using it. I stood by the doorway a bit confused. He looks at me straight in the face and says in sickly sweet tones, "I won't hurt you." I sauntered past him into the stall and began pissing as fast as humanly possible. He gently touches the stall door, pressing against it ever so slightly while still repeating, "I'm not going to hurt you." I'll never forget that guy's voice. Now finished, yet somehow crapping my pants, I slammed the door open to see him waiting for me at the sink, now silently staring. I try to dash past him, but he lunges and was able to grab the collar of my shirt. By this time, my friend cracks the door open to look inside to see what's happening. My collar is released and I sprint with Fred back to the playground and tell my mum what happened hours later. Her expression in reaction was so strange. I can still see the strike of anger met with a sense of fear. It was 1989. Working as a technician, you kind of already see the stress. Coming home would be a blessing full of ease, having 1 kid at the time and being married to an industrious wife who made sure the house stayed neat and tidy, diapers changed, etc. I could say it was a huge relief. But what would make days like this greater were the walks in the large fields and woods that we had at a neighborhood park down the street and around the block. When we first moved here, I would occasionally go there for clearance, but that occasionally turned into additional after a couple of more stressful months. I would do the usual after I would reach the big field right before the entrance of the woods. I would take off my shirt/toes and lay down in the grass with my head facing the sky and let Mother Nature do her thing. Since you're hearing my story, then you know it's already a particular day for something horrible, but specifically something life-changing. Coming home after another painful and stressful day of work, I didn't even bother grabbing a quick snack.
All I do this day is come home, kiss my wife and son, and tell my wife I will be back at 6 around usual, spending 3 minutes walking down the street talking to myself, and I would start my mind relaxing until I reached my destination and fully let my mind ease. I remember laying down on the grass and settling for 10 minutes to hear a faint whistle. 10 seconds after, I remember getting so tired I passed out, only to wake up to me being face down on the table at home. Looking out the window, I can see my wife outside with my son before I lay my head back down to go to sleep again, only to wake up 10 seconds later in the grass in the exact same spot I was in before I closed my eyes for the first time. By this time, my heart already had started to pump rapidly, but the drowsiness always got the better side of me. And before I was able to move, I would find myself drifting off into a quick sleep to find myself in the same spot, in the same position on my kitchen table, lifting my head up trying to push myself up, as if I was paralyzed from actually getting onto my feet. I was always defeated by my eyes getting heavy and my head slamming down on the table, only to wake up in the same spot in the grass again. I couldn't get any type of process of what was happening and how I could stop it. The only process I could get at was how I was going to continue to live life. I couldn't keep count of how many times or how this had gone on, but I want to say for about 5 to 10 minutes before I woke up in a hospital bed with serious neck, head, back, and leg injuries. Something I noticed when I tried to shoot up is I was met with the paralyzation of heavy injuries and a nurse chiming in that I was awake. You would assume that I had been thrilled to the core and had every bit of confusion as to what the hell had happened. My heart was still pounding, not wanting to fall back asleep, hoping that the nightmare was over. It seemed like it was. The rest of this was a little blurry, until I had made a bit of recovery and was able to talk. At this time, my wife was on the bedside with me, and when my first words slipped out, I had asked her what happened, and why I was laying in total pain in the hospital bed. "You don't remember?" she replied. Supposedly, I had been in a fatal T-bone at an intersection coming home from a stressful day at work. The crash was so fatal, witnesses had thought I had died on the spot. But no, this was one of those miracles where the worst that happens to you as a driver is life-lasting impact injuries. But for me it was physical and mental scars. As you can guess, the mental scars got the best, which created questions as well as terrifying nightmares for me. I wasn't really able to get any sleep during this period of my life after the traumatic event, and was given sleeping pills as well as depression pills, anxiety pills to get my mental health better, which did hardly anything for me. With things like this, it's best to either try and give no thought to it, or just face it and find answers as to why such stuff happens and is part of your life. But for my job, sadly, it's disability. But it doesn't answer the questions as to what the hell happened. I can hardly keep a stable mind. I've tried to go through any simplification of what the hell I saw or hallucinated that day or how it even happened. Even the therapist was thrilled. To say the least, they're trained to be calm no matter what, but she had a look of horror on her face. It seemed like they tried their best to hold it, but I've told this story to other people, and you just know. If anyone has any explanation for what the hell happened to me, please, I'm all ears. I have been for years. This happened when I was 14 years old, and I was fishing up in Alaska. My father works for United Airlines, so we'd fly up there on standby for cheap every summer and go fishing for silver salmon. There was a car crash at a river we were fishing at, and a lot of police were around. After a little while, a police officer came over and asked me to please stand up and fish on the other side of the river. It was a bit of an unusual request. I had been sitting on a log covered in a tarp that someone had presumably left while fishing there earlier due to the fact it had been raining that night. Turns out I wasn't sitting on a log.
Once they pulled the tarp off, it was actually the driver's body. A very creepy experience.
When I was 21 and booked my first solo trip to Berlin, a foreigner asked me to snap a photo of him on the Christmas market. It was around 8 p.m, which was already dark as hell in Germany for December. Naive, I agree. No spot was good enough for him, so he asks me to take it over there, in a darker, more empty spot several meters behind the booths. I get a weird gut feeling. The phone he hands me is at least 10 to 15 years old, with those crappy 2-megapixel cameras. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, let myself be led away to the spot he wanted, and the second I placed myself in front of him and opened the camera on his phone, 3 other guys in each direction and me in the middle of them jumped out. My gut told me to look up from the camera. The second I see them coming towards me, I drop the phone and run. I had to go a good 100 meters until I'm back in the crowd and look back at the guys who were all just staring at me, not talking to each other, and not mad I dropped the phone or anything, just silent stares. I disappear into the crowd and catch the next train back to my hotel. For all I know, they probably wanted to kidnap, murder, or do something worse.
I was about 8, and it was the middle of summer. My parents had to work, but they couldn't leave us alone at home. So they put us in this daycare. The daycare, which I can't remember the name of, had been converted from one wing of an old hospital, and the rest was closed off. They were still doing renovations on our side of the building, and the 3rd floor was supposed to be off limits. Of course, when something is off limits, kids start making up theories about why that is. There were rumors that the place was haunted. A few of the older kids even claimed they'd seen some stuff. One kid even bragged that he'd snuck up to the 3rd floor and saw something in one of the bathrooms. We pressed him on it, and he said he heard someone call him from the bathroom, and when he went to investigate, it was an empty room. But he looked down the drain into one of the sinks, and a peanut popped out and started talking. At the time it sounded stupid, but enough of the younger kids were creeped out, and somehow that made me get the creeps. Well, over the next few weeks, all the kids would circulate these stories and pester the caretaker to take us upstairs to see what was there. Eventually, the renovations got to a point where it was safe to go up, though the caretaker still kept us on the 1st and 2nd floors to keep track of us. And the pestering reached new heights. They relented one day and promised to take us up after lunch. So everyone starts walking upstairs, and I'm at the back of the group with one of the caretakers, while the other 2 caretakers led the group. We get to the top of the stairs and it's pretty boring. White walls, a few doors missing, wood frames, single fan at the end of the hall that was turned on. The caretaker I was with seems confused and walks over to the fan and turns it off and unplugs it. The rest of the group began walking towards the peanut bathroom, and when I turned to start making my way there, I thought I saw someone standing in an empty room I was near. I barely caught it from the corner of my eye and snapped my attention to the room. Startled, but no one was there. After the past few weeks hearing how the place was haunted, I was thoroughly scared and ready to go back downstairs. The kids got to the bathroom and I hadn't even gotten to it myself when they started screaming and running back out. I turned around and bolted back downstairs and noticed that the fan was plugged in and turned on again. Now I have to reiterate how everyone was in front of me except for one caretaker, who was standing next to me and couldn't have been the one to plug it back in, as it was at the other end of the hall. That was it for me, and I asked her to take me back downstairs. The rest of the kids had explored a little bit more, but came down pretty soon after. Not the scariest thing, but the 3rd floor of that place cemented my belief in the paranormal. There were some smaller incidences during the week, leading up to the third floor investigations. One of the rooms at the daycare was filled with large foam shapes that kids like to climb around on and make forts out of. Most of these were light enough to carry, but a few pieces were too big for anyone but the adults to move around without struggling. I remember one piece in particular was just a large rectangle. The kids were playing in that room, then decided to move to another room that had some dolls and action figures. We had one caretaker lead us there while the others stayed behind. About halfway down the hall, I hear a loud slap sound which made me jump out my skin. I was at the back of the group, and awkward, and tended to just follow the other kids. I whipped around to see that large rectangular piece sitting about a foot behind me. No one was close enough to have dragged it there, and even if they had, I would have heard them dragging it behind me. As the heaviest piece, no one could have brought it, and no one should have been able to hide in the time it took me to turn around. The other caretaker poked her head around the room with a confused look and collected the foam rectangle. The last thing I remember clearly about the place was when we were all gathered on the first floor. I'd left something on the second and asked to go up and get it. We only had one caretaker with us at the time, and she couldn't escort me up as all the other kids needed to be kept track of, so she had one of the older kids follow me up for safety. We got to the room and the light was out, but the thing I'd left was pretty close to the door, so I grabbed it. Immediately the older kid I was with screamed and began running downstairs. I looked up and saw what looked like a figure in the corner of the room and bolted. When I got downstairs, the kid was doubled over laughing and teasing me for being afraid of a coat rack. I was mad, but went on with my day. Near the end of the day, we were back on the second floor playing while waiting for parents to show up. My dad came to get me and I went back into the room to collect my things. The light was on, and there was no coat rack in the corner.
My husband, friend and I were taking a 2-week trip through the UK. All three of us are Christian. One of the nights we were staying in this flat in London, I had a dream that I was shaking myself awake in the dream. When my dream self woke me up, they pointed to a dark corner to the right of me and said, "You need to pray. There's a demon in that corner." I woke up my husband and told him what I had dreamed. I said, "Let's not tell our friend because it could really freak her out, and maybe I just ate some bad food." Well, the next morning our friend comes into our room, sits on our bed and says, "Guys, I think we really need to pray. I had this dream where there was a demon in the corner there," and proceeds to point to the same corner I had dreamt about. Still gives me shivers to this day. This story from when I was much younger, was at least 7 years ago now, is when I rented a room in a house. I had 4 roommates. Coming home from work, I would always find the stove on, and everyone would deny using the stove. There was a bunch of us, so it's quite likely that one of us just kept forgetting, but we could never figure out who. We joked that it was a haunted house, but we all thought someone was just a little bit drunk or whatever when they left it on, or just forgetful. Anyway, this event keeps happening, much to everyone's annoyance. Well, one night I'm standing in the kitchen with them. We're just having a chat, when suddenly we hear a noise over by the tap. We look over to see water start spewing out at full blast from the kitchen tap. As you can imagine, shock and dread filled our bodies as we rapidly turned the water off and fled the area. Safe to say we figured out that it may have just been paranormal activity that was causing these strange events to happen in our shared home. Safe to say, I moved out very quickly after experiencing it firsthand. Right around high school graduation, I was sitting in the living room at 1 or 2 a.m. when I saw headlights and heard a thud. I cracked the front door and there was a car outside. It appeared as though they may have hit my truck. As I began to open the door, they sped off. I checked the truck the following morning, but nothing looked obvious. I went to work at my cashier job, and my co-workers were talking about armed robbery and a taxi driver that was executed with a handgun overnight. Pretty scary, I thought. About a month later, one of my mum's friends who happened to work for the county asked me to look at my truck very closely and call her if I found anything. I told her later that after close inspection, yes, there was a small crack to the plastic trim around the driver's side tail light, and I told her about the car that probably did it. She explained to me that detectives had arrested a group of teenagers while investigating the cabbie murder, and that during the interviews they mentioned stealing a car and bumping into a truck while joyriding before robbing a gas station at gunpoint and executing a taxi driver. About 2 weeks ago, my wife and I had friends over, and someone mentioned a Facebook story about a cabbie getting robbed at gunpoint. Someone else mentioned the execution, so I shared my story. My wife then added that we both could have died that night because she was at the gas station when the clerk got robbed. I knew that something bad happened to her around that time and that she never talked about it much. So it's a scary and odd coincidence to me and her. Even though we both weren't together physically at that time, we were both in the path of the same violent crime spree, and any other course of action during that time could have resulted in the death in either or both of us.
I was around 12. I don't remember the date. I've always been a big childish person, partly because of a car accident when I entered medium school and felt like it stopped my growth mentally. I barely had any friends because I was going through the weird looks/bullying, and the only ones that were okay to hang out with me were younger people or of the same mindset. Every year my parents would send me to a summer camp called Lost in the Mountains, where there were basically mountain-like activities, hiking, exploring forests, etc. I live in France. I don't know how summer camps work everywhere else, but here it's basically an age classification, with there being 3 groups: the blue ones, younger, yellow medium, and green elder. I was supposed to go into the yellow group, the medium one, because I was still too young, but for some reason I got taken to the green one, composed of people that were 16 or 17, so a lot older than me. And everyone hated me for being so young and childish. The day that I remember was the last day. The instructors that were keeping an eye on us brought us to the deep spot of the forest to have a picnic, and after that they looked at us and asked who wanted to play hide and seek. Everyone was probably too old for that, but they still set things up, to which most refused to even hide. I was a kid. Of course I was excited when they just started counting, and I ran as fast as I could to a place super far they wouldn't find me. There was a smallish river. I jumped over it, and after some steps I feel a hand catching my hair very violently. I tried to turn, but the hand just slipped to my neck and caught it really tight. I was terrified and tried to fight back and resist, but the hand that was restraining me was that of a grown man with lots of strength. I began screaming at the top of my lungs. I've never screamed so loudly, but seemingly no one ever heard me, and the guy started talking while dragging me into the forest. He was completely mad and kept repeating, "You'll see. I hurt you so much you'll cry and scream even more." I remember him talking about harming me and violating me. I was 13 and I was so terrified. I've never lived any physical abuse, no hitting, nothing was more than words, and he dragged me further into the forest and I kept screaming and hitting, until at some point I found a way to bite his hand with all the strength of my jaw. He screamed back from pain and shouted that I was crazy. It's when he got it hurt enough that his arm retracted and I escaped and turned back and made the sprint of my life. I think the guy lost interest or something because he didn't chase after me. I jumped back over the river and found the only friend I'd made during camp. I kept running though. I still wasn't sure if she saw the thing that happened or if she ignored it. I went to the monitors but felt too terrified to do anything or even tell them. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if it was someone from the camp or a total stranger. I didn't even see his skin or the clothes he was wearing, nothing. I was just too afraid. The same night I called my parents, but they couldn't come to get me right away. I had to go back home in the bus like everyone else. What terrified me the most was that the guy could be one of the people in the same group as me. He could have just hit me in my sleep and dragged me somewhere. I still don't know, and I never want to know. All that I know is that I was terrified for the remainder of my stay there, knowing that me as a 13-year-old girl could have been in very real danger because someone had targeted me, whether they be part of the group or not, and I felt extremely vulnerable and scared for the rest of my time there. As you can imagine, I was overjoyed when it was over, and never wished to return to camp again.
I had a dream of a not-so-close university friend dying in a car accident. I met him the next day. We had an exam. He was laughing about how his arsehole friend lied to him. They were all going to travel to a seaside town, but left him to force him to attend his exam. A few minutes later, someone called him. These guys got into a car crash, and they all perished in the accident. I was at a little party last summer, and we realized one of my friends was missing. There were only about 20 of us, so it didn't take a long time for us to realize this. Now keep in mind, the host's house is very big and ancient, near a wood that is known for being the place where people went to drink. We call her phone a few times, and she doesn't pick up. We called her boyfriend at the time, who said she had never contacted him. It had been about 30 minutes since we noticed and went searching the house twice, but is nowhere to be found. It's raining extremely heavy, so we don't think she would have been there, but she was very drunk. Me and my other two buddies ran around the neighborhood for half hour. We couldn't find her. On the road next to the house, I just see a random 40-year-old guy with a beer in his hand walking in the rain drinking. He looks at me and screams at me to watch out for the rain, but I was lucky to still be this young, which I thought was funny. Oh, and he also clearly had a gun in his pocket. I was relieved to see he didn't go towards my friend's house. Keep in mind I'm in Canada, so I found this very odd. I go with another girl in the woods and talk to her about earlier because maybe she thought people were there, even though there was clearly no one there because of the rain. The girl I was with was really panicked too. We walk around the woods calling her name, and then I noticed something. There were two very tall people in the middle of the park on top of the stairs in what looked like long robes. They were both looking at something on the stairs. My brain automatically thinks it's the girl we're looking for, but these guys looked really creepy, so I didn't just want to go to them and tell them it's our friend. My brain automatically thinks it's the girl that we're looking for, but these guys looked really creepy, so I didn't want to just go and tell them it's our friend. We'll just pick her up, thanks, bye. I didn't mention this to my friend. I was surprised the two hadn't heard us before, and after a minute they start walking away. I guide the other girl to where they were without either one of them seeing me. We arrive at the spot. They were not looking at my friend on the floor or anything. There were just 3 squirrels apparently dead on the stairs. They did not look like they were shot, hit, or bitten. I remember that we still have to look for our friend, and my other friend is pretty disgusted, so we leave. We call our other friend to see if they find her, but they didn't. It's the most anticlimactic ending ever, but we go back to the house completely drenched in water. My friend goes to get her boyfriend's coat, and she finds the girl we're looking for sleeping in the corner under 3 other coats. Glad she was safe, but I was close to having the scare of my life in the woods earlier, thanks to these creepy buggers and whatever the hell they did to those poor squirrels. I was on a bike ride with my friend through an apartment complex. We had gone there about 5 times and knew it quite well. There were 2 things weird about it. First, there was this man who had his phone to his face like he was on speaker but never said anything. He always watched us as we cycled past. When he noticed a spot we usually rode, he stood in our way, like literally would walk to where we rode and stand. This may have been because we rode street on BMX, but I don't think so. Then one day we got split up. One of my friends with me, and the others on his own. We rode around looking for my other friend, but couldn't find him. Eventually we found him. He was biking towards us fast. We slowed down and asked where he was, and he said that a guy had been found following him in a truck. He was quite shook up, and someone called the police. They arrived and could not find the truck, and nobody thought of mentioning the man. We never saw the man with the phone or truck again, and we never returned to the complex. I was 13 years old at the time, and living with my mum and stepdad in their 250-ish-year-old house. I had fallen asleep in the basement, but just to be clear, it's not what you're picturing. Their basement, while eerie, had a couple of big couches and a large TV. Definitely a leisure room. I woke up at one point in the middle of the night and couldn't move at all. My entire body was frozen except for my eyes, which were frantically flying around. I know this is standard sleep paralysis, and I've had it happen more times than I can count. But here is where it's got worse than usual. Their house was an old townhome in the city, narrow and very long, extending back. So I'm there on the couch in the middle of the night, completely frozen and unable to move, which is terrifying enough and horribly unsettling. And then down the hallway towards the back of the house is very dark because my mum had turned off the corridor light, and I could barely make out the back stairs. And I saw a figure walking towards me, a woman middle-aged at most, walking slowly and directly to me. Her face obscured by shadow, and I could only make out the faintest linen pants and blouse. Next thing I know, I felt hands closing around my throat and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. But I was screaming in my head for what felt like an hour. Suddenly I could feel my limbs again and shot up off the couch. Not 5 seconds later, I was sprinting upstairs to my bedroom, too afraid to look behind me. And I never went back to that basement alone until I was an adult. And even then, it still creeps me out. I went to a high school that was built years ago, maybe 200 to 300. Me and my friend noticed these hatches that were around 6 feet off the floor next to the toilets. For context, the school was based around a quad, so there was a toilet down some stairs at each corner of the quad. Obviously, we had to check these hatches out, so we did during a drama lesson that we snuck out of. We got in there, and there was a corridor under the actual corridor, which is only about 4 to 5 feet tall, so we had to crawl through. The corridors connected all the toilets and their vents at the top of the walls, and there was a skirting board level in the classroom, so we could watch lessons, which was cool. There were tons of pipes and electrical wires and other non-interesting stuff like you'd expect. Apart from in one corner of the quad, the hatch for this one was locked from the inside, looked like the pipes had gone back to the wall or stopped, so the walls were bare concrete slabs rather than bricks, which was odd. There was a small gap at the bottom of the wall that I could only just fit through. It was a struggle crawling under, as we only had our mobiles and for torches, and I'm not the smallest of people. When we got through, it felt so much colder in this opening than in the other corridors. The space was far spacious as we could stand up, and also the lights from our torches didn't light up at the opposite side of the room. When we shone them, we almost made it seem like our torches weren't even on. The room smelled so bad, and we saw what looked like a decomposed cat, which was now mostly just bone and fur, next to the wall closest to us. More freaky stuff there was the stone arch above the cat. There was some red writing that wasn't in blood but was pretty creepy. It was a few years ago, but I vaguely remember it saying something along the lines of, "If you're found here, the school will expel you, but Lucifer will do much worse." There were a few scratches on the walls and some symbols that we thought were letters, but we couldn't make them out. We took some pictures and got the hell out of there. Because we were crapping bricks at this point, it was a fairly prestigious school, so expulsion was probably the scariest thing that could happen to us. This was 4 years ago now. Safe to say, me and my friend never opted to return. When I was 17, I was at a friend's party. We grew up in a small town, lots of wood, no street lights, houses far apart from one another. There was virtually no crime in this town, except for the abduction of a 5th grader about a decade earlier. Her remains were found behind a restaurant in town years later, but the case sadly was never solved. My friends and I had been drinking all night, so I didn't want to drive home. That happened to me frequently enough, and I always had a sleeping bag in the trunk of my car. Around 2 a.m., I ran out to get the sleeping bag. It was pouring out with thunder and lightning, and I could barely see my car, which was parked just beyond the driveway on the other side of the road. When I got to it, I popped the trunk and dug around for my sleeping bag. There was a flash of lightning and the street lit up for a second. That's when I noticed a middle-aged man standing a few feet from me. He didn't move, he just stood completely still. I can't remember what I said, for all I know I probably gasped. However, I remember exactly what he said. "I just love thunder and lightning storms, don't you?" Not even a hello or a "sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." I slammed my trunk shut, sleeping bag still in there, and sprinted back to the house. I immediately told everyone what happened, and of course they were drunk and thought I was making it up, but I forced them to look out the window towards the driveway. After 30 seconds, lightning struck and the street lit up again. Sure enough, there was the man walking down the street in the opposite direction of the house. I don't know about you, but it was intensely creepy. When I was around 10 or 11, I was home alone. The doorbell rang as I was watching TV, so I hastily moved my bowl of cereal and got up to answer the door. It was the mailman who said he had gotten a package, but it was so big that he needed help carrying it. Something felt off about him, as he wasn't wearing a uniform but a dirty white shirt and jeans. I asked him where his truck was because I didn't see it parked out front, and he said it was around the corner, and to just follow him and grab the parcel. He kept telling me to go with him, but I politely said I wasn't feeling well and that we would just get our mail from the post office. He said how much of a hassle that would be, and just go out there and get it with him now. I said I had to get my shoes on from upstairs, and he waited outside. I locked the door, bolted upstairs and closed all the windows, and called my mum to come home and explained everything. The man was still outside as he shouted at me, asking if I'd gotten my shoes. I replied that my mum was coming over because she was stronger and could help carry the package. Once I said that, he was quick to run and I never saw him again. They never caught him, and I hope that he never lured any kids and tricked them into going into his van. So to the creepy mailman, let's never meet again. I'm fairly into fitness, and especially at the time of this first stream. I was working at a supplement store and I had just purchased a new pre-workout with my generous staff discount. It had unapproved ingredients in it that are now banned, and I was sure this was messing up my sleep. Another customer who had become a friend of sorts had been taking it well, and we had both stopped taking it a week apart due to night terrors. But I'm still unsure if this has anything to do with my semi-frequent sleep paralysis dreams. I was living alone in a small one-bedroom apartment at this time. It starts off as a typical sleep paralysis episode. Heavy chest, feeling like I can't move or speak, and I feel like a presence is in my room. I finally opened my eyes, or so I thought. To the right of me, standing next to the bed, I see a small boy. He looked, well, dead. He had black around his eyes and an expression of complete emptiness. No emotion. I woke up and really opened my eyes. I still don't know if they were open to begin with or not. All of my sleep paralysis dreams felt this way. I never knew if my eyes are open, half open, or completely closed, but I always make out my surroundings exactly how they are. Not too long after this happened, another night, I felt the same presence in my living room. I had fallen asleep on the couch and saw what appeared like a dark shadow move from one end of the living room to the other. I couldn't move and tried my hardest to get a better view of it, but I simply couldn't. Shortly after, I heard a voice say something from the bathroom that I couldn't make out, which takes me to the next experience, which is by far the most terrifying. Not long after the first couple of episodes, my family and I headed to Dolphin Point, accompanied by my now fiancé, a holiday destination about a couple of hours from where I live. The first night we all played some board games, and after a while we retired for the night and got ready for bed. Not long after I fell asleep, I was again in a state of paralysis, but I could not see the room we were in. An old beachside shack with a few rooms. In a panicked state, I noticed a dark, shadowy cloud above the end of the bed. I freaked out to say the least and tried to wake up. My vision turned towards my fiancée while squirming to wake up, and then I hear her whisper to me, "Help me." She was facing me while she said this. This is when I realized, oh my god, is she in trouble? Is something here? I tried to scream but only managed to get out a faint, My fiancé realized I was having a nightmare and shook me awake. I woke up and asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she says. The strange part of it all was she told me she wasn't even facing me while she was sleeping. How could I see this room in my sleep without any prior visits to this place? Strange. This is why I wonder if I open my eyes during these episodes. Lately I've been having similar things happen to me before I sleep. Hearing loud knocking on what sounds like a large door. I awake to no noise. What sounds like a train speeding towards me at its peak, but I wake up to silence. I have dreams like Inception, as funny as that sounds. I will wake up in the exact spot I'm sleeping in, but still in the dream. To the point I don't know if I'm dreaming or not. I can't say I'm unhappy about my dreams. Sometimes I'm able to control them and have the ability to do what I like. I've flown through an empty black void. I've had many lucid dreams, some terrifying and others not so much, and wonder if at times I'm losing my mind. But I certainly hope not. I want to blame these occurrences on an over-imaginative mind, but I'm never quite sure.
This takes place in 2017. I was born in the year 2000, so I was around 17. I worked at a popular chain restaurant as a hostess. We had a high turnover rate, so we constantly had new people working there. The bar was pretty low on who we would hire. Anyway, one day this guy comes in his mid-40s, probably around 5'9" and of average build. He had a small gap between his teeth and had emotionless eyes, dark grey/brown hair, and a bit of a comb-over. He's wearing an Hawaiian-style button-up shirt and khaki cargo shorts, and asks to talk to the manager, Michael, a good friend of mine. After about half hour of talking, the man shakes Michael's hand and leaves. We joke that he looks like a stereotypical serial killer. He had no job background to talk about really, just that he's from California and he was a male escort. He's having a second interview on Tuesday, so I guess we'll see what happens. Michael informs me. We both made jokes for the next few days about the serial killer co-worker we were sure we would soon have. Even after he was hired, it was a running joke amongst everyone. His name was John. On the surface he was okay. Maybe a little inappropriate at times and touchy-feely with the girls, including myself, but everyone thought he meant nothing by it. Looking back now, it's weird how we let him get away with borderline sexual harassment. I can recall several times that he grabbed me by the waist, called me sexy, and made sexual noises as I entered the room. I was only 16. I had only been working there for about 6 months. I had become close with most of the staff at that point, even the new guy John. He was a little weird to everyone, but especially to me. It was like he had some kind of fascination. In the back of my mind, I thought I should stay on his good side, just in case he was as creepy as he acted. So when he invited us all to a barbecue at his house, I went. I didn't want anyone to have a reason to dislike me. Maybe it's because I'm a people pleaser, or maybe it was the feeling in my gut. It was me, Michael, his girlfriend, and their 3 children, and Justin. John told me to go there at 4, so I did. And when I arrived, I realized I was the first to be there. I always get to places early, so I figured everyone else should be there soon. He lived in a nice enough neighborhood, and from what it seemed, he was pretty well off. Nice house, 2 cars, a boat even. I'm greeted by John at the front door, who welcomes me with a hug, and asks if I can help cook the burgers, as he was vegetarian and didn't know how.
I thought it was a bit weird, but figured he just wanted an excuse to have people over. He lived alone. He told us he had a girlfriend in Germany, and that he was previously married in California. He had 3 kids, one was an adult at this point, and the 2 others must have been between 4 and 8. I had met his children before when they came to visit him at work. The oldest took care of the 2 younger. She was deaf, which I thought was interesting because I'd never met a deaf person before. She seemed like she didn't really like John, and only came to see him when she was dropping off the 2 younger ones to visit him for the weekend. He didn't have custody of either of them, and usually only saw them every few months. Sure, I say, but I'm not a very good cook, trying to give a forced smile. I had never been alone with him before, and it was getting more uncomfortable by the second. That's when he offered the tour. He grabbed me by the hand and ushered me outside. He had a good-sized backyard. It had a privacy fence. Not 1, but 2 small sheds and a garden. So that's where you dismember people and put them in your garden, don't you? I joked. Looking back at him, he just smiled. John had caught on to the serial killer jokes at work rather quickly, but he thought it was funny. He would often joke about hiding dead bodies, and I would usually play along. I don't know why I did. I think I just really felt like it was part of an inside joke. You got me. Why do you think the veggies grow so well? He said in a joking voice while walking towards the garden. Ex-wives make excellent fertilizer. After a while, he went back to the kitchen and told me to put on the apron, so I did. You know, you look so sexy in that. Let me take a picture and send to the other girls. You know they love you, right? He pulled out his phone and asked me to smile. At this point, I realized I'd been here for at least an hour and no one else was here yet. I quickly sent a text to Michael asking him when he would be here, and he replied with, John told us to be there at 6. You're already there? I gulped. Why had he asked me to come 2 hours before everyone else? Hey, come sit at this chair with me. John called me over from the living room, so I did. He patted the back of the recliner and also let me know that it was my spot. I sat down, and he sat down on the couch across from me. I guess now would be a good time to mention that John owned several guns, and he usually had one strapped to his hip. No big deal, this is Texas, it's pretty normal for people to own guns, but he had unstrapped his gun and was toying with it. Do you want a drink? While gesturing to the beer in his hand. No thank you, I really don't like beer. I was contemplating texting Michael to hurry up. I've got a 16-year-old girl and a gun. He chuckled as he typed away on his phone. And I thought he was joking until Michael messaged me asking if everything was okay and saying to sit tight and that he'd be there soon. 20 minutes later, everyone had shown up. Michael made it a point to mouth, "Are you okay?" to me, and I nodded. John was just joking around, right? And the night went on. Still weird, but not quite as bad as before. Justin and John made quick work of cooking, and the rest of us sat at the table, including Michael's kids. He had 2 boys and 1 girl, and his girlfriend called Megan. Soon John had fixed up some cocktails for all of us, even me. I hardly touched it, but when Megan finished hers, she got up to get a refill. That's when it got weird. Sit down, John demanded, standing up from his spot at the table, and just looked at him all confused. I'm just getting a refill. I'll get it for you, you're the guest, sit down. A bit more calmed than before, he grabbed her cup, went into the kitchen to fill it, and we all just kind of looked at each other. We made quick work of eating, even though the burger was almost raw in the middle, and at some point John had started talking about his kids and missing them. That's when he told Michael's daughter to come sit on his lap. She was a sweet little thing, so she did. I love you, John told her, tearing up. Say it back. So she did. And he started bawling. He was rambling about being just so happy that he had friends. He wished we could all just stay there forever. We were all quiet except for Justin, who was totally oblivious to anything going on, as he kept munching away at his burger. As everyone was getting ready to leave, my mum pulled up to come and get me. John quickly pulled us both into one of his sheds, sitting us both down. My mum looked at me confused. Thank you so much for letting your daughter be my friend. It means the world to me. I know it's kind of weird since I'm old and she's still a kid, but it makes me happy." He kept repeating this in different variations for 10 minutes, until my mum said, "Okay, we're leaving now." And we both started heading for the car. Michael and Megan were still there looking relieved to see us. I later found out John had ordered them to wait until he came back to leave. They wanted to leave as soon as he stepped into the shed, but didn't want to leave us, and Justin had already departed. Once they saw us emerge, they got into their cars and started strapping their kids to the seat. John followed me and my mother to our car and stood in the way of the driver's side door as soon as my mum buckled up. "Please don't leave," he said, still blocking us from closing the door. Eventually he made up an excuse about how it was getting dark and we had to go. Later I heard from Michael that John came back from our car and told him and Megan that my mum was crazy and wouldn't let him leave from our car, that she must have been on drugs. A few months later, me and another co-worker had planned on seeing a movie after work. He was also named Michael, but because that was confusing, we called him Logan. He had about an hour more of his shift left, and I decided to wait at one of the empty tables and eat some lunch. As I sat there, John came into the restaurant, presumably to get his check, because we all had to pick up our checks from the manager. He noticed me sitting alone and took the opportunity to sit next to me. "Hey, what you doing?" he exclaimed with a big smile on his face. "I'm waiting for Logan. We're going to see a movie together after he finishes his tables." "Why don't you wait at my house? I'm sure you don't want to wait here any longer." He leaned in, never taking his eyes off me. "He's going to be done soon. I might as well just wait here," I replied, trying to convince him to leave me alone. He didn't leave me alone. He begged me to come with him, and since I have a hard time saying no to people, I agreed. I let Logan know what was going on, and he seemed concerned but said, "Okay, I'll be there soon." Michael and I had already told Logan about our weird experience with him, so he knew that John was weird. Once we get to John's house, he made me a glass of orange juice and vodka. "Not supposed to drink, you know. I'm only 16, I reminded him. But he persisted. "Here, hold this." And that's when he handed me his gun. "Don't worry, it's loaded." I'd never held a gun before, and I definitely did not want to hold it. It was very uncomfortable and weird. He sat me down, and he told me, while pulling out a bench, "God, you look so sexy with that thing." I sat down at the table, trying to ignore his comment. I put the gun down and began working on the half-finished puzzle that was on the table. John put my screwdriver down next to the gun. I was right next to a window, and as I looked outside, I realized it was raining. Logan had messaged me that he was on his way, and I was just glad that I would get to leave soon. John was sat on the couch with several guns and a lot of ammunition sitting on the coffee table in front of him. From what I could tell, he was cleaning the guns, but the way the room was set up, he had his back facing me. Logan showed up, and we had 20 minutes until the movie started. "Well, we better get going," Logan said, motioning for me to follow him. Just as I got up, John pointed to the kitchen. "Why don't you stay for a drink? You have time before the movie starts, right?" Before either of us could protest, he patted the spot next to him, getting up and returning from the kitchen with a mixed drink for Logan. Just one, I guess, okay." Which turned into two, which turned into three. Not by Logan's choice, but because John was so insistent. "Okay, the movie just started. If we go fast, we may make it before the commercials end." Logan got up, grabbed his keys. "You really think you should drive now? Logan, you've been drinking." John chuckled, taking the keys out of his hand. "Stay here for a while. It would be awful if you got into an accident. Please," he begged. Logan and I exchanged concerned looks before sitting back down. "Okay, we'll stay until the next showing, I guess." Both of them forced a smile. "Do you guys want to see something?" John asked. We nodded hesitantly. He brought out a small safe and struggled to open it for about 10 minutes and even made us try because he liked watching us struggle. "I'm going to make you two rich.
When he finally got it open, it was full of $2 bills and $1 coins. Cool stuff, but nothing of real value. He handed us both 2 Sacagawea coins each, claiming they would put us through college. Neither of us were buying it, but we went along with it, thanking him. My father collected coins, so I knew a small amount about them, and I assumed that John was confused. When he pulled out a Nebraska Centennial gun, it was gold-plated and had mother-of-pearl handle. He pointed it to the wall and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. "Whoops, glad that wasn't loaded," John chuckled, before putting it down and using his hand to spread the coins and various forms of currency around the world on the table. He did it for a while, scooping up coins and letting them fall between his fingers. "You guys should go get some drugs. I don't care anything," John told us, his eyes wide open. Logan and I saw this as an opportunity and took it. "Sure, we'll go do that. We'll be back," Logan replied, grabbing his keys, and once we got into his car, we both breathed a sigh of relief and decided to go to Michael's house to tell him about all the weird stuff that happened. When we got there after telling him everything, Michael got a text, and it was from John. "Don't trust them. They're liars and bad people. They're evil. They're using me." Me and Logan looked at each other. "Is he talking about us?" I asked, getting concerned. Michael looked at his phone. They had 15 other texts from him on screen. "Crap," Logan said, his eyes getting wide. "I forgot my phone at his house." Michael and I looked at each other and said, "Do you want us to go with you?" "What do we do?" "Go and say that my mum walked me home and you ended up dropping me off at my house, but you forgot your phone. Say we couldn't find any drugs for him. We looked for a while. That's why it took so long. We couldn't call him back because you left your phone, and mine is out of service." I instructed this, trying to come up with better excuse. Logan left, and about 40 minutes later he came back. He's literally crazy. I got there, gave him the excuse, and got my phone. He was sitting in the chair looking at me and then got up, hugged me, and wouldn't let me go for 10 minutes. Kept saying that he loves me and that I'm his best friend. Logan told us, and we all decided there's definitely something wrong with John. We never went back to his house, and John began acting weird at work. Erratic, jumping from happy to sad randomly. He quit a few months later, and the last we heard was that he moved to Tennessee. I looked up his mugshot on a website and found an arrest record from 2013. The charge was listed as assault. The most prominent conversation I remember having with him was when he said he wished me and him could run off together, rob banks, kill people, and have lots of sex. In his words, I would be the Bonnie to his Clyde. That I'm the woman of his dreams. And I'm 16. I really hope not to see John again. I've had enough of him for a lifetime. When I was about 7, I went to a sleepaway camp. There were about 8 other people in the cabin with me. No supervision. They had set up tents near the cabin and we slept so we could grab them if we need anything. All I remember is someone screaming and yelling, "Oh my God, who was that?" From what I remember, whatever it was looked like a young girl around our age who looked up and disappeared once I made eye contact. Everyone in the morning remembered seeing it. Still not sure what the hell it was, but it scares the crap out of me still to this day. In college, there was a big rock at the top of a hill that everyone used to climb. It had lights pointing to it, so it would be lit up at night. Some friends and I decided to climb to the top at night. It was a nice evening, but there was a chance of rain, so we get to the top and I see lightning in the distance. I count the time between the lightning and the thunder. 15 seconds. I tell my friends, "Hey, that storm's coming our way, and I guess we have around 15 or 20 minutes before it gets here." It took some convincing for them to agree, and even though I was being a negative Nancy, we would head back down. Getting down took 15 minutes. Just before we got to the cars, lightning hit the rock and blew out all the lights. Everyone made it off the rock. When the lightning struck, one of my friends said, "Please don't say I told you so." Last April, my boyfriend's friend was throwing a party. The party hall they were using was in a not-so-nice part of town.
There was mega drug deals and gang activity close by. The event was formal, so I wore a dress. It may have been too tight or flashy. Of course, my boyfriend wanted to go walk to the QT down the street because he got bored of the party. On the walk back, I noticed a very sketchy-looking male staring me down. I figured I'd just ignore it because we were almost back anyway. The party hall was actually two that shared the same bathroom area. It was just a little hallway that connected them, and on both sides had doors, so you only saw who went into the bathroom. Once we got back, we were in the line for food, which was right next to the bathroom hall door thing. The door creaks open, and I look over and it's the guy who was staring me down earlier. He whispers something inaudible. Not thinking, I leaned a bit closer to try and understand him. He then reaches his hand out and whispers, "Come, look at this with me," and attempts to grab me. I immediately jump back and try to get my boyfriend's attention, and when my boyfriend looked over, the doors closed abruptly. I don't know who the guy was, but I know that if I let him grab me, I'm sure nothing would have gone well. Back when I was around 9, I was at my grandparents' house for Christmas. We always stay overnight there on Christmas Eve. My grandparents, dad, and sister all got their own bedrooms, but I was stuck with a cot in the hallway of the basement. I remember waking up that night completely paralyzed. I could feel something large and heavy breathing on my back. My dad, who's a firm believer in the paranormal, said it was probably just the ghost of his old cat Onyx. A few months later, I'm staying at the grandparents' house again because I have a doctor's appointment in the city. This time, I get to sleep in the basement bedroom instead of the cot in the basement hallway. I assumed what had happened at Christmas was just my extreme fear of the dark, giving me an incredibly vivid dream, so I slept with the lamp on in the bedroom. Later that night, even with the lamp on, I wake up, again, paralyzed, back to the open closet, and feel something lay down next to me and start slowly stroking my back. Even now, I don't really know what it was. People have told me it sounds like classic sleep paralysis, but I'm not so sure. What do you guys think? One night when I was 13, I was doing a weekend visit with my dad. You know, the kid of divorced parents. In the middle of the night, we got a phone call. I knew that a call in the middle of the night was never good. My dad answered it, and I heard him whispering, and I knew it wasn't good news. It was at this point I noticed that there were red and blue cop lights whirling around from the window. The next thing I know, my dad comes into my room, which I shared with my sisters. The weird thing was he was squatting down low. He saw I was awake. Since I was the eldest, my dad told me what was going on. He whispered, "I need you to help me wake up your sisters and keep them calm." It was the police. There's a man on the street with a gun, and we are being evacuated. At this point, my heart was racing. I remember it was pounding in my ears, it was beating so hard. The cops had told us to leave all of our lights off, stay away from the windows and lay low. So I helped my dad wake my two younger sisters. We played it all as a game, as we stayed near the floor and put on our winter boots and coats as it was freezing out. The next part was the hardest. We kept it vague what was going on with my sisters because we had to go back down 2 flights of stairs very quietly. When we got outside, I was terrified of being in the open. My mind started imagining how bad it would be if we got hurt, or if I died. What if I had to watch my sister or dad get shot? And yet I couldn't let any of that show, so my sisters wouldn't be as scared as I was. We meet the cops at the bottom of the stairs. They told us to leave the area on foot. My dad asked, "Where?" They shrugged, so we went to a 24-hour burger place a few blocks away. After we evacuated the area, I felt so relieved. We sat in the burger joint drinking cocoa and sleeping on the benches for a few hours with some other evacuees. But nonetheless, having that existential crisis at age 13 really scarred me for the longest time. I don't remember if the guy ended up being caught, but eventually we were allowed to go back home. But still, the fear you feel
when someone might be targeting you with a gun and may very well want you dead by the end of the night definitely leaves an impact. This happened in the summer of 2017, Tallinn, Estonia. My sister and I, both Americans in our early 20s, were on a trip at the time to Estonia and Latvia. I definitely want to preface this by saying that Estonia was one of the most interesting, amazing places I have ever been to, and I'd highly recommend traveling there over any tourist traps in Western Europe. But anyway, we had been exploring the city, which is beautiful, for the past few days, and it was our last night in Tallinn before we caught the bus to Latvia the next day. I had wanted to check out the LGBT bars in each city. I'm a gay girl, my sister is not, and decided on our last night we'd go there. Unfortunately, that happened to be a Thursday, so we got all dressed up to go, pre-gamed a bit, and headed out to the bar. When we got there, it was completely empty except for the bartender, an unfriendly old Russian woman. So my sister and I decided to just hang out there for a while and order a drink each. Figured that since we were there, we may as well just chill. The drinks were cheaper by US standards, at 4 to 5 euros a piece, and I got an amaretto on the rocks. So at some point, this older guy in his late 50s or early 60s came and sat at the bar. I had been in a comfy chair in another room, sipping on my amaretto, as my sister and I decided to explore the area, and I just happened to be in a different one at the time. But meandered back to the bar to chat with my sister, as she was in an armchair in the corner, and I chose the bar stool closest to her. Unfortunately, that also happened to be the seat next to, or a few seats from, this guy who came in. At some point, and I can't remember how exactly, he began talking to me, with a heavy Russian accent, and spoke very, very little English. I figured he was an older gay man just trying to make conversation with a foreigner. Harmless, right? So I started chatting with him, me being somewhat buzzed and generally more gregarious and less guarded than usual. Unfortunately, being tipsy, I had forgotten that at least in the Baltics, gay bars are billed as being for LGBT people and open-minded, aka LGBT-friendly, hetero people. Also, that guy could have been bisexual. So this guy told me his name was Igor, and we had a very slow, stilted conversation due to him not knowing English and me not knowing Russian. Apparently he was visiting from the city of Rostov, which is in the southwest part of Russia. The hometown of Andrei Chikatilo, not a good sign. Anyway, we had been trying to talk for a while, and then he said, "Young American woman." I thought it was kind of weird, but chalked it up to him using some of the few English words he knew. In any case, it was getting a little late, and I was looking for a way to politely escape. I told my sister I was going to go to the bathroom really quick before we left. So I went downstairs, and there was only one multi-stall bathroom, at least I could see. I forget whether it was marked women's or just gender neutral, so I went in, and when I came out of the stall, there he was, right in the area outside the stalls, wandering over to the sinks. I had no idea he'd followed me down, so I was pretty weirded out at this point, but not enough to run. I washed my hands, and he was between me and the door, and kept trying to chat. And then he began repeating, "Young American woman," over and over a few times. Fortunately, at that moment, my sister appeared outside the door and called me to go, and that proved the perfect opportunity to escape. She had seen him follow me downstairs and thought to check up on me to make sure I was okay. Had she not been there, I don't even know what would have happened. Probably nothing good at all. So we hightailed it out of there, but for a last very creepy twist, as we were walking away from the bar, and we were a decent distance away, we looked back and saw Igor leave too. We practically ran for our Airbnb, and he was never to be seen again. We left for Latvia the next day, and had a great rest of our trip. Personally, I think there was a very good chance he wanted to kidnap us or worse, and I'm glad I didn't have the misfortune of having to find out. I was talking with a medium about some life choices I'd made in the past,
I had mentioned to the person that I had met a shady person when I was in high school that somehow knew about me, and basically all the things I wanted to have in life. Needless to say, they were not good things to pursue despite the ends, and it would involve me in a life of crime, shady dealings, and a string of other things that I certainly don't regret getting myself into. In real life, I turned the guy down and went my way, and never saw that person again. So I looked at the median and asked, "So, I don't regret choosing this path, but I would like to ask, what would have happened if I chose to follow this guy instead of walk away from him? I like to believe that I am set far enough away from this event that I had proven my point now, that clearly I did not choose to follow him. But since you're here, what can you tell me would have happened to me?" It was a very tempting offer after all, not gonna lie. The medium sat for a few moments and gave me a straightforward response. "You would not have lived to see your 27th birthday." As such, this answer threw me off. It was not really the answer that I was expecting to hear from someone like this. It honestly did not surprise me a whole lot. Back when I had this experience in high school, I had a thought enter my mind at the time that said something like this: "You can do whatever you want. You're the age now where you can do whatever you want and mum and dad can't stop you. Just remember one thing. When you go into an operation like this, there's no backing out." I immediately imagined myself trying to back out as I shook the devil's hand, and how no matter where I turned, they were always in pursuit or looking for me. I would have had to live this life of a nomad, never staying in one spot, lying about my identity, and leaving whenever things got shady. I couldn't see my family or friends again, and if I did try to contact them, I would be found, and something terrible would happen. I would have to be all in, if that's what I wanted to do. No bail. But back to the present of me talking to this guy. That answer always kind of stuck to me. It probably made sense that I wouldn't have lasted long and got hooked on drugs or probably got some kind of disease. Fast forward a few weeks and I had a dream. It was probably one of the scariest dreams I would ever have. And considering that I usually have dreams where I die, and a lot of them are nightmares, I hope this has some credibility to it. It was one of those dreams where I knew what was going to happen before anything happened, almost like I had already gone through the dream once, and I was going through the whole thing again. I found myself exiting a car and walking up to a target house. It was my first assignment. My boss had told me that if I did this well, I would be accepted into their group, and if I did more assignments, I would earn privileges. For those of you not getting the cues, it means I had to kill whoever was in the house. I reluctantly walked up to the front door, knowing what I had to do. This is where it all starts, I thought to myself in the dream. As I rang the doorbell to get inside, I felt odd to say the least. I knew what I was doing was wrong and didn't really want to go through with it, but I felt compelled to do it since it technically already happened, and I was only replaying what already happened before. My feet were heavy, my arms were stiff. I took a breath and blew away the anxiety, and calmed down before I made a move. I could not quite get over how oddly familiar everything around me was. Yes, I have lived through it before, but even the first time going through it was somehow familiar. The door opened and an unfamiliar face showed itself to me. An older man in his 60s. I was about to ask if I could enter but was interrupted by the man as he nearly collapsed with the joy of seeing me, hugged me and invited me in, and ushered me into the living room, where he shouted to his wife, who was also in the house, and audibly happy to hear of my arrival too. I thought to myself the time to strike was nearly upon me, and in my pocket I could feel my weapons. I thought to myself about the other assignment that I had taken before as well, and specifically remembered 2 other houses where I had entered into and gotten away with what I'd done. They were both single-member houses and surprisingly easy, but something about this was different. I looked around the house and all I could feel was warmth and love. I was about to end that and replace it with cold and bitterness, and I looked at the old man who was continuously facing away from me. Could I really go through with this? I had the scene playing in my head. The house would be one of the worst crime scenes the city had ever seen. The horrific scene that investigators would never see again with this brutality. The more time went by, the more and more I couldn't do it. My eyes got blurry and saturated in tears, and collapsed, saying I couldn't go through with it. Both of the elderlies came to help me and were worried about my state. I told them everything, showed them my weapon, and that I was sent there to end them. And that how, because I refused to do my job, there was someone parked a few streets down that was going to come and terminate me in their place for not cooperating with the job. I feared for my life, but decided to stay and fight for these people, and was resolved to write them a new destiny. The man walked up the sidewalk to the house. I had taken too long. He was pissed. He knew I had caved. I pointed out the window and said that the guy was coming for me. The old lady had told me to hide in the other room and that she would answer the door. The old man hid me in the room and just stood out of eyesight of the door when it opened. The last thing I remember before I woke up from this dream was the door knocking and the old lady opening the door. I had woken up crying in my bed. My tears had gotten soaked all over the pillow that I had to wash them later. I didn't know who these people were, but it unsettled me so much that I was in an unfamiliar house with unfamiliar people, and yet I had so much empathy for them. I was bursting in tears. After this dream, I went to the same medium again and asked him who these people were. I didn't actually tell him anything about the dream aside from the question. Who were the old people in my dream? Not even an old couple, just the old people. Without missing a beat, he replies, "They were your parents." I walked out after he said that. My heart was sitting somewhere below my stomach for the next several hours, and every time I thought about this dream for a long time, it still sinks when I think about it. It wasn't such a terrible dream, but I know in my heart that I would have done this if I had chosen that other path. I'd like to believe that this dream was showing me what would have happened to me had I chosen the other path. I have no idea, in all honesty, if that's true, but right now, the only form of consolence that I have about this experience is that I chose not to go through with what happened in the dream. I have the wonderful knowledge of knowing that I turned the dude down and have no worries about the alternate reality of mine, but it hurts a lot to know that it was a possibility, and to be honest, if that were the life I had, I have no regrets looking at it now and knowing that I would be dead before I was 27. I love my parents.
It was 2019, and my class was going on a field trip to Berlin. It was for a few days, but we still had a lot to see. One evening, my friend and I decided to explore some of the city by ourselves, which we were allowed to do as long as we were back in the hotel by 10 p.m. We went to the underground and got off. When we had been driving for about 20 minutes, as 20 minutes in the underground is a lot, which meant we were far from the hotel, we got off the train at a random station and started to go up. It looked really nice, and the first thing we saw was a fast food place. How bad could this street be? Well, when we got to the very end of the pavement, the surroundings changed like day to night. The street didn't have as much light as before and everything was darker. We still decided to walk further due to our stupid curiosity, and after some time we spotted a man, a strange-looking man. He had a hoodie on and stood up against the wall. He looked at us, but we tried to not look at him. I was the one walking closest to the wall, and I had a weird vibe about him, like he was trying to do something. So we walked this big circle around him, but as we were nearing him, he grabbed out to reach me, but didn't manage. My friend and I just started running. We looked back and he didn't follow, but still we ran as fast as we could. We went around the corner of the wall and searched on Google for the nearest underground. After some time, we were on the train heading back to the hotel. I don't know what would have happened if he'd have managed to grab me successfully, and I didn't want to find out. I was at the post office, and I noticed an older man standing in the corner, watching the line. I didn't think much of it, But I did notice he didn't have a package or mail in his hand, which was strange. I thought perhaps he was waiting for something or someone. After I finished my transaction at USPS, I started walking towards my car. Unfortunately, there were a lot of cars, and I had to park further at the end of the parking lot. A few seconds after I'd left the USPS store, the man exited too. I felt a bit strange, but kept walking towards my car, taking my keys out as I did so. I started getting this weird feeling that he was following me, so I quickened my pace. He began walking faster too. When I got close enough to my car, he began screaming, "Wait, I have something to say to you." I'd never seen the man in my life, and he was scaring the crap out of me. Not saying anything in the post office and then chasing me to my car. I unlocked and ran in, slammed the door, and he tried opening the handle. He began banging on the window, trying to open the door, but my hand was so shaky that I stalled the car. The car was stuck, and I wasn't sure if there were people around, so finally I lowered the window an inch and asked him if I could help him with something. "I noticed you at the post office and thought you were very beautiful. Can I get your number?" I don't know how many times this has gotten him play, but it didn't work for me. "I have a boyfriend," I told him, retried my keys and zipped the hell out of there. Now whenever I'm in a parking lot, I always look left and right and behind me to make sure no one's following. I'm not sure what the guy would have done if he'd have opened the door handle, but honestly I don't want to think about it.
I come from a pretty middle-class family, all wholesome, etc. I have bipolar disorder, and in my teens I smoked weed, drank, took a lot of shrooms, hung out with the guys that stole cars and shoplifted. I used to hitchhike a lot, as we lived pretty rural. My first real girlfriend was a pretty hectic chick from Ukraine who grew up in Russia. Long story short, she suddenly ghosted me, but eventually I found out she was seeing someone else. And obviously I saw red and had to find out. So I hitched into her town at around midnight. The guy who picked me up was in his 40s or so and asked why I was on the highway hitching. He was worried because he had a daughter around the same age, and he asked advice on how to deal with her better, and he listened. I felt a huge respect for him. He asked why I was hitching at midnight, and I told him. All he told me was to be careful. It could be a big moment in your life. The ride I got home was the big one though. So I get to her house, and long story short, cops were called. I sprinted through backyards and through drains and alleys to get to my hitching spot at the start of the highway. As I'm running down the road, I see a car. A miracle. It's 3 a.m. now, and the car actually stopped. I open the door, and it's the nicest smelling car. The driver is a lovely 70-year-old lady, and she says, "Are you going to rob me?" I laughed and said, "Only if you don't rob me," and I hopped in. We rode in mostly silence, but towards the end she said, "You remind me of someone I lost long ago. I know things will get better for you soon." And eventually I got home. I had a little granny flat away from the house, so I snuck and jumped into bed. Literally 20 seconds later, I hear my dad walk from the house to my room on the phone saying, "I think you've got the wrong person." He barges in and is like, "Hey, Danny, are you here?" "Yeah, why?" "The police are on the phone looking for you," and hands me the phone. "Hello, your ex-girlfriend says you smashed her window." "I've been here all night." "Where's that?" And I say a small town around 20 minutes away. "Okay, good night." If the car hadn't pulled up, and let's face it, why the hell was an old lady driving around at 3 a.m., I'd be put away, and my life messed up. I cleaned up my act, and after high school I'm doing very well, but my life would have been very different if it wasn't for that old lady, giving me the ride that literally saved my life. This happened when I was 18. I was going to meet my friend at a local school to skateboard and just hang out. My friend said he might not show up because he had a headache, but told me to go ahead and he'll text me if he's coming or not after. That's the only reason I went. I live right across the border from the US in Canada, and we have smog right now because of the wildfires in California, so that made everything a bit more scary. I was taking a quick break on my phone when a kid with a backpack on walks up to me and says hello. I didn't know if he was talking to me, so I said, "Pardon?" He casually responds that he was just saying hello and walks past me. He says to have a good day and leaves around the corner of the school. I thought that was the end of it and just got an okay, probably just social kid vibe. Honestly, I wish I was wrong. Not even 10 minutes pass when this kid comes around the corner he first came from last time. I had set up my phone to film a trick, so I actually got the first minute and a half of our interaction on tape. Only my feet and board are visible, but you can clearly see him. Because the smog, everything was pretty fuzzy, and it looked like he came out of nowhere. So I got a bit scared when I noticed him. The next part is just our conversation. "Hey, I walked around the whole school. We're the only ones here." He said that while looking directly at me. "Yeah, makes sense. COVID and the smog, not too many people around, I guess." "Yeah, I want to check, not even kids with their parents." It put me on edge a bit. Everything he said seems really thought out, and was said in a very creepy tone, almost like he wanted me to know we were completely alone. At this point I picked up my phone, and the video was still recording. This made me feel safer in case something happened. He then sits down in front of me, takes off his backpack, puts it in front of him and unzips it. He takes out one of those metal sticks you have to put together by screwing each part together, and takes out a silver mask. If you've seen Money Heist, it looked a bit like the Salvador Dali mask, but all silver, and with just a moustache being black, and then lays them out in front of him, all while staring at me. "Do you know about gangs?" I'm not in one, so I don't know that much about them, but I know they exist. "Do you know about Poco gangs?" I live in a city named Poco, and we have a specific gang here. Like I said, man, I'm not into gangs, so I wouldn't know too much about them because I don't associate with them. Poco gangs wear masks like this, and they use sticks like this to attack people. I actually got him asking me about gangs on video, and replying. I'm standing with my phone in hand at the end of the video, and I text to call my boyfriend, saying that there's a kid here asking me about gangs and that I'm a bit scared. The call is going, and my boyfriend can hear our conversation but doesn't respond, knowing that he should just hurry over, as he lives a few minutes away. He pulls out from his back what I know is a golf divot, which is easiest to explain as a two-pronged sharp thing that fixes grass in golf. I didn't know what it was and just saw a metal and sharp object. I took a step back and moved towards my stuff, which was a few feet to my right. "Are you leaving? Are you scared?" "I'm just gonna grab my stuff, bro." He drags the divot along the ground and says, "This is how you make it sharper." "Yeah, they sharpen knives like that too." "It's sharp." He then made an almost stabbing motion with it as he said that, and I move away a bit, being genuinely scared he's gonna do something and put my board between us. "Are you leaving? Are you scared?" If anyone is around me and has something sharp while I'm talking to them about gangs, I'm gonna keep away, mate. He threw the divot back in his bag and mockingly said, "There, I'll put it away, it's just golfing, jeez." "I'm just concerned about my own safety, dude." I put my stuff in my pockets and he once again asks if I'm leaving. "Do you want me to go?" "Nah, I just want to talk and sit with you." At this point, my boyfriend walks around the corner that's behind me, and I see fear in the kid's eyes. My boyfriend is 6 foot, while I'm 5'3", and is wearing a hoodie with his hood up. He did look intimidating, and it made the kid back off. "Do you know him?" "Yeah, he was supposed to be here like 20 minutes ago." My boyfriend walks up to me and pretends he was just late to hang out and puts his arm around me. "Is that your older brother?" Then he looks at the kid and says, "Nah, I'm his boyfriend," and kisses my forehead. We start to leave and say bye to the kid, who looks at me and says, "I'll see you later." Yeah, I don't know about that. I was creeped out and scared, and I'm saying random stuff just to leave. My boyfriend and me turn the corner and start walking when we realize he's following us. He had the mask on and is dragging the metal stick on the cement. It's making a really loud noise, as everything else was really quiet. There was in fact no one around. My boyfriend walks me to the playground, and finally people started showing up. A family with their kids, a lady walking their dog, and a guy smoking near the forest. My boyfriend and me went to the corner store, and I fill him in on what happened, and that he came perfectly in time. We buy some random stuff and go back to his house where his friend is hanging out and waiting for him. We tell his mum, who informs us there has been a non-emergency call to the local police station of a kid hanging out in people's yards for no reason, and says we should call them too, to let them know in case it's the same kid and because he had a dangerous weapon. We drive back to the school to see if he's there. He was, and was with the guy who was smoking. I called them non-emergency police line and got an automated message saying they're either closed or can't take any more calls. The next day when I called, they apologized and said that it should be 24/7 and not get the automated message. They asked if I had a picture, which I didn't, but I gave his voice and description. And the police said they didn't have much to go on but would keep a record. But in any case, I hope to not meet that creepy kid again. I want to start by saying that I'm a 21-year-old male from Canada. I have chronic insomnia, and have had since I was 8 or 9. That's when my lucid nightmares began. I call them lucid nightmares because it was almost like a lucid dream, but I can't control too much aside from myself, and the fact that I have very vivid, unrealistic dreams to the point where if I get hit in the dream, I'll wake up with a bruise or a mark, sometimes bleeding, like I was in my nightmare. I know this sounds like a lot of BS, but I've got no reason to lie. I've had sleep tests done, and I've tried lots of different sleeping medication, and none of them seems to make it stop, or even lessen it at all. My doctor has no idea, neither does my dad, or any of the sleep technicians. I've had many sleep tests done. They say it's in my head, but can't explain why the physical harm is there when I wake up. It starts with me waking up in this wooded area like a forest, but way more than trees than what normal forests are like, and it's dark and I can barely see. I also don't have my glasses, which is odd. I normally need them, but here I don't. I can see very well, and I hear a scream and I get scared, so I start waking up and looking around, and then I hear it. My dad's calling for me, and he sounds confused and scared, which is unlike him. He's 6'4", covered in tattoos, and doesn't take anything from anyone. It's weird to hear him distressed. I head in the direction of his voice and find this thing. I don't really know how to describe it, standing at around 5'11", but on 4 feet and not bipedal. It was white and looked kind of scary like an iguana, and it was very humanoid, but backward, so its back was where its stomach would be, and it was hunched over like it was a crab walking. Most terrifyingly is that it was mimicking the voices of people I knew, and it had no face, just blank, but I could tell it was looking at me. Well, at least my direction. That's when it just ran, and I mean faster than I had ever seen anything move, let alone something that looks like it shouldn't be able to move that quickly. As it moves, it screams like it's in pain. It is the most awful sound I've ever heard. Writing this now, I can still hear it. It gives me chills and makes me wish I could forget that god-awful sound. My dream does not have a happy ending. It did catch me, and this thing began cutting me with human-like nails and screeched. Then, these weird-looking flying things about the size of a wine glass come out of where its face should be, and they start to consume me. And as I perish, I wake up sore, covered in bug bites, and my dad was trying to wake me because he needed me to watch the dogs while he went to look at a place. That was a week ago now. I've barely slept and have been working to keep me going crazy. I'm freaking out. No one believes me. But when I tell my dad, he thinks I'm mad. Honestly, I don't blame him. Just typing this all out and reading it feels crazy. They aren't spider bites. The doctors say they don't look like that. And the burns, it feels like I was burned. I have an appointment tomorrow to see what they make of it, and I will update you if you want. As unreal as it sounds, this is one of my nightmares. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, and I'm eager to see what they say. But until now, I don't know what the hell is making this happen. This happened before I was born. Our house was placed at the back of our land, so we had a big front yard and a tall metal fence. One night my dad was outside hanging the clothes and he came running inside and said to my mum that somebody was coming in from the front fence. She scolded him and said that our fence was locked and that there was no way anyone was breaking in and that it was just his imagination. Around this time, one of my dad's friends said she has been seeing something standing behind my mum lately, but my mum was a skeptic and thought his friend was trying to scare her. A few days later, around midnight, Mum was about to lock the door in our house when she started to feel like the floor was shaking. Her first thought was that it was an earthquake, but then she saw how our living room tiles started to tear apart and the floor started to crack up in the dark abyss. Dad and her quickly ran outside. As soon as they got there, they started throwing up. My dad didn't puke as much, but my mother puked till blood came out, so my dad kind of knew that something was happening, and quickly went inside again and grabbed some holy water that my grandma had brought from Costa Rica not a long time ago. He poured the water into my mum, and she immediately stopped puking. He also poured some into himself and scattered it around the house. When they saw how some white smoke came out of the house, then they saw some white smoke leave the house. The next morning my aunt came and saw the mess. She quickly contacted a shaman or curandero, and they bought lots of stuff for a cleansing ritual. One of my uncles also passed by and told my mum that the spirit was sent with the intention of killing her and that she's lucky to be alive. My dad never saw the floor cracking. The illusion was only seen by my mother. Fast forward a few months, and I was born. My half-sister had been telling my mum to never let said family member, Alan, take me anywhere. One morning, Alan came by and asked if he could take me out for a few photos at a restaurant and he'd be back in a few hours. Mum refused, but Dad insisted on letting me go as he was close with Alan, and Mum told him what my sister said and he just brushed it off. So I was out all day till 5 p.m, and Mum was mad because he thought we'd be back sooner. That night at 1 a.m, I began crying non-stop. My dad immediately called Alan and asked him what's wrong with me, but he told my dad to just go put a glass of water beneath my bed. That worked only the first night. The next night I was crying again, so Dad called Alan and this time he said to put a knife under the bed, and again it only worked once. On the third night my mum and dad got mad and swung the knife around, but it also worked that night. They couldn't bear it anymore, so they called for a family friend who's a curandero. She came into our place and inspected my room and said there was something strong in there, so she needed to perform a ritual. So they went and brought all the stuff she needed. At the time, Alan used to hang out a lot with a santera, so we suspect she used him to get to us. There was also this one time my dad fought with a friend that practiced voodoo and santeria. Dad was away for a few days and left Mum and me alone at home. His friend passed by, gave us a big doll-shaped present and left. It was around dusk, and as soon as Mum unwrapped the present I started crying. May have been a coincidence. The doll was an old lady with lots of wrinkles and was quite tall and creepy. Luckily a cousin had just dropped by, so Mum asked him to dispose of the doll and he quickly agreed and left with it. Nothing paranormal happened, but it just became weird and gave somebody a creepy old-ass doll for no particular reason. Dad knew an awful lot of friends and family and wasn't on good terms with some of them, so that's why some of them tried to harm us. I'm not a big believer in the paranormal and I haven't experienced anything firsthand, but I believe in what my mother said, and I'm open to the possibility that everything that happened may have nothing to do with paranormal activity. But I'm interested if anyone has been through anything similar or knows of hexing or spirits and stuff like that. When I was 18, I purchased my first home. It was a small rundown foreclosure home that I got for next to nothing, a perfect fixer-upper for my young son and I. My dad is a carpenter, and so he was able to do most of the updates for me before we moved in. Dad didn't tell me outright that anything supernatural ever happened to him, but on one occasion when I arrived to the house to help out, he asked me, "Was that you a little bit ago?" "No, I just got here," I replied. and he just shrugged. The other time he was under the house working on something and he kept hearing footsteps above him. Convinced it was my mum or I, he yelled a few times before assuming we couldn't hear him and gave up. I didn't chalk these up to paranormal experiences before, because I'd never had a paranormal experience and I wasn't even sure if I believed in them. Once my son and I moved into the house, I slowly started noticing odd occurrences. I constantly was thinking I heard the door to the breezeway open and close, and the sound of shuffling as if someone was arriving home. But of course, no one was ever there. The sound of footsteps upstairs was also very common. The first time my boyfriend came to the house and stayed the night, we were fast asleep when the stereo came on at full blast, scaring the hell out of us. The next morning we were sitting at the bar in the kitchen having breakfast, and we began discussing the previous night's events, and then my boyfriend proclaimed, "If there's really something in this house, I wish it would just show itself." As soon as he finished his sentence, we heard a loud crash, and we turned to look. A mini cooler was tumbling down the stairs with enough force that it left a dent in the wall at the bottom of the staircase. Another time, my boyfriend, our son, and myself were all sleeping in that living room. It was a very hot summer, and we didn't have central air conditioning at the time, so we had pulled the mattresses out on the living room floor where the window AC unit was. Around 3 a.m., we woke up to the sound of an alarm clock going off. We didn't use an alarm clock, so we jumped up to try and find the source of the noise so that it wouldn't wake our son. I'll never forget when I found it. I followed the noise to a plastic bag that was beside the couch that had some of my boyfriend's belongings in it, and pulled out an alarm clock. I was frantically hitting buttons trying to get it to stop before I decided to just unplug it. When I grabbed the cord, I realized it wasn't plugged into anything at all. I just held it, staring at it, and held it for my boyfriend to see before it stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The next day he inspected the clock, convinced it had batteries in it, but it didn't even have a battery compartment. This final story was the one that scared me the most. I was in the living room watching TV while my son slept upstairs. The baby monitor was beside me, and from my position, I could look straight up the stairs and see the door to my son's room. Well out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow dart across the upstairs hallway, and simultaneously there was a short burst of static interference on the baby monitor. The hairs on my arms stood straight up, and I stared up the stairs at my son's door. The hallway was illuminated by a nightlight, and my son's door was white, so I could see it fairly well. It looked like a head was peeking out from across the room to the hallway from my son's door, but I thought surely it was my imagination, until after about a minute it stepped out. The thing that terrifies me the most was that it didn't glide across the floor like you see in the movies. Its movements were so human-like and distinct and three-dimensional that if it hadn't have been a black, stark silhouette, I would have thought it were an intruder. It stepped out the doorway and took a few steps across the hall to my son's door, then turned its head like it wanted to check if I was watching before it stuck its head in, and shoulders through my son's door as if to have a peek, to see what was in there. When it did, I mustered all the courage I could and just yelled out, "No!" And it pulled its head out and quickly dematerialized in such a strange way. It was like it shrunk into itself until there was nothing left. I have goosebumps just sharing this. I bounded up the stairs, grabbed my son, and left immediately. I stayed the night at my mum's house for about a week after that. Eventually I sold that house, and I've never had a chance to ask the owners if they've ever had any strange experiences there themselves.